There are certain cases in the long companionship which I enjoyed with Sherlock Holmes that remain fixed in my memory, less for the crime itself than for the singular atmosphere in which it unfolded. Some were remarkable because of the extraordinary ingenuity of the criminal, others because of the strange accidents that seemed at first glance to mock reason itself. Yet among them all there is one which I have withheld from publication for many years, not because justice demanded silence, but because several of the principal persons concerned occupied positions whose reputations deserved protection during their lifetimes. Time has removed those restraints. I now lay before the public the curious affair which Holmes himself always referred to as the letter written after death. It began upon one of those bleak November mornings when London seemed determined to disappear beneath its own fog. From the windows of our rooms at Baker Street the street lamps still burned, although the hour had passed 9. The air outside possessed that damp chill which crept through every crack in the window frame and settled stubbornly into one's bones. Holmes, wrapped in his faded purple dressing-gown, reclined upon the sofa with his violin resting across his knees. He was not playing it. Instead, he absent-mindedly plucked at a single string, while his sharp grey eyes wandered toward the ceiling, where the smoke from his pipe drifted in slow blue ribbons. I had scarcely finished my breakfast when Mrs. Hudson announced that a gentleman had called upon urgent business. Before the visitor entered, Holmes glanced briefly toward the unopened door. "A solicitor," said he. "You know him?" I asked. "I have never seen the fellow." I laughed. "Surely that is one of your experiments upon my credulity," my dear Watson observed. The door opened. A tall gentleman stepped inside. He was perhaps 50 years of age, with carefully trimmed whiskers streaked by premature gray. His black coat was cut with professional neatness, though the cuffs bore faint traces of chalk. Beneath one arm he carried a leather document case. Holmes rose politely. "Good morning, Mr. Edwin March." The newcomer stopped in astonishment. "You know my name?" "It is unnecessary to burden my friend Dr. Watson with another demonstration," said Holmes, smiling faintly. "Still, since you ask, the ink stains upon your second finger are fresh, but confined to legal blue-black. Your cuffs bear chalk from record shelves. The leather cases government issue, supplied to firms who handle probate. Finally, your card protrudes exactly 1/4 of an inch from the inner pocket." The gentleman looked downward in amazement. "I had entirely forgotten the card." "It often assists memory," Holmes replied. Mr. March laughed despite obvious anxiety. "I begin to understand why all London speaks of you." "Only the guilty speak of me willingly," Holmes answered dryly. "Please sit." The solicitor lowered himself into the armchair nearest the fire. "I scarcely know where to begin. Beginning generally saves time." Our visitor clasped his gloves tightly. "I represent the estate of the late Sir Alister Pembroke." At that name Holmes ceased plucking the violin. "I recall the gentleman. Retired industrialist, collector of manuscripts, resided at Blackwood House in Kensington." "Precisely. He died 4 days ago." Mr. March stared. "You amaze me again." The obituary occupied half a column in yesterday's Morning Post. Our client smiled weakly. "I suppose nothing escapes you." "A vast number of things escape me," Holmes replied. "Only the relevant ones remain." The solicitor leaned forward. "Sir Alister died under entirely natural circumstances. His physician certified heart failure." Holmes nodded. "So far there appears little need for Baker Street." There was none. For the first time genuine fear entered the man's voice. A letter arrived. Holmes remained perfectly still. It was addressed to Miss Eleanor Pembroke, Sir Alister's niece. "And? It was written in Sir Alister's own hand." I interrupted. "Surely he composed it before his death." "So we believed." Mr. March reached into his leather case. "So we believed." Mr. March reached into his leather case. "But the letter is dated 2 days after he died." An unusual silence settled over the room. Even Holmes leaned slightly forward. "I assume," said he quietly, "that someone examined the handwriting." 3 experts. They each declared it genuine. Holmes held out his hand. "The letter." Mr. March produced an envelope of heavy cream paper. Holmes examined it without opening it. "The postmark?" "Westminster. Yesterday morning." "The seal?" "Unbroken until Miss Pembroke opened it." "The envelope itself?" "Purchased from Sir Alister's own writing desk." Only then did Holmes unfold the single sheet inside. His eyes travelled rapidly across the page. He read it once, then again more slowly. Finally he handed it silently to me. The contents were astonishingly brief. "My dear Eleanor, If this reaches you, events have unfolded exactly as I feared. Trust no one connected with my household. Before the week has ended, another death will occur. The key is hidden where the dead still keep their promises. Burn this after reading. Your affectionate uncle, Alistair Pembroke. November 17th. I looked toward the solicitor. And Sir Alistair died on the 15th, at 8:30 in the evening. Holmes accepted the page once more. The handwriting is indeed remarkable. You believe it genuine? I believe, Holmes answered carefully, that it deserves investigation. He carried the sheet toward the window where the pale daylight struggled through the fog. Without warning, he smiled. A curious gentleman. Sir Alistair? Numero, the author. You think someone forged it? I have said nothing of the sort. He rotated the page slightly. The pen pressure varies. So little that most experts would miss it. He sniffed the paper. I had seen Holmes inspect ashes smaller than grains of sand with greater excitement than another man reserved for diamonds. What have you found? Instead of answering, he turned to Mr. March. Tell me about Blackwood House. The solicitor collected himself. It is a large Victorian residence. Sir Alistair employed 6 permanent servants. Relations? Only Miss Eleanor, who inherited the estate. And enemies? Mr. March hesitated. The deceased had many business rivals during his lifetime. Any recent quarrels? There was some disagreement with his secretary. What sort? I do not know. Holmes seated himself once more. Who discovered the body? The butler. Locked room? No. Anyone absent from the house? No. Holmes steepled his fingers. Has anything else occurred since the funeral? Mr. March swallowed. There is one more matter. I suspected as much. The family crypt was opened. I looked up sharply. By whom? No one knows. Were valuables stolen? No. The coffin disturbed? Not that anyone could determine. Holmes's eyes brightened. When? On the same night the letter was posted. For perhaps half a minute Holmes spoke not another word. His expression had become singularly distant. I knew that look well. The machinery of his extraordinary mind had begun to move. At last he stood. Watson. Yes? Kindly place your revolver in your coat. You expect danger? I expect uncertainty. He turned toward our client. We shall accompany you to Blackwood House immediately. The solicitor rose with visible relief. Thank heaven! Holmes slipped the mysterious letter into his pocketbook. As we descended the 17 familiar steps of Baker Street, he paused only long enough to retrieve his grey travelling coat and deerstalker. Outside, London lay hidden beneath a curtain of yellow mist. Hansom cabs emerged like ghosts before vanishing once more into the gloom. Somewhere in the distance a church bell marked the hour, though its sound came muffled through the fog. We secured a cab, and as it rolled southward Holmes remained unusually silent. His long fingers rested lightly against one another, while his gaze remained fixed upon nothing visible beyond the window. I had learned that such silence was never empty. It was during these moments that fragments invisible to ordinary minds arranged themselves into patterns. Halfway across Hyde Park he spoke suddenly. Watson. Yes? Do you believe the dead can write letters? I should say no. So should I. He smiled faintly. Which leaves us with a far more disturbing possibility. And that is, that someone wished us to believe they could. The cab continued through the thickening fog until at last the imposing iron gates of Blackwood House emerged before us. Behind them stood a mansion of dark stone whose upper windows vanished into the mist like the towers of some forgotten monastery. As the gates creaked slowly open, I experienced an uncommon sensation, one not merely of curiosity but of foreboding. For although I could not yet understand the significance of the mysterious letter, I felt instinctively that we were entering a house in which death had not yet completed its business. Indeed, before another sunset had passed, Holmes's prediction and the warning contained within the impossible letter would prove terrifyingly accurate. Our cab had scarcely disappeared into the curtain of fog before the gates of Blackwood House closed behind us with a metallic groan that echoed strangely through the still morning air. I have often remarked that certain houses seem to possess a temperament of their own. Some welcome the visitor with warmth despite their age, while others appear to resent every footstep upon their grounds. Blackwood House belonged unmistakably to the latter class. The long gravel drive curved between ancient yew hedges that had been clipped with mathematical precision. Their dark branches leaned inward until they formed a gloomy avenue beneath which the carriage wheels seemed almost reluctant to proceed. Beyond them rose elms whose bare limbs stretched against the grey sky like skeletal fingers. The house itself was a massive Victorian structure of blackened stone, its Gothic windows narrow and severe. Ivy clung to its northern wall, while grotesque gargoyles watched from the roofline with expressions that time had softened but never erased. Holmes surveyed the building without speaking. "There are 2 entrances besides the front door," he remarked quietly. I looked about in surprise. "I see only one. The tradesman's entrance behind the eastern wall, and a conservatory door opening toward the gardens. They are hidden. Only from observation, not from deduction." Mr. Edwin March regarded Holmes with renewed admiration. I had forgotten the conservatory entirely. Holmes merely smiled. The front door opened before we reached the steps. A tall, elderly butler stood waiting with the rigid dignity peculiar to men who have served a single household for decades. His silver hair was brushed immaculately, yet I noticed at once that his face bore unmistakable signs of recent strain. "You are Mr. Sherlock Holmes?"
"I am."
"I am Charles Bennet, sir, Sir Alister's butler." Holmes inclined his head. "You discovered the body?" "I did, and have scarcely slept since." The old servant blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "The trembling of your left hand, the discoloration beneath the eyes, excessive tea, little sleep." The butler lowered his gaze. "It has been a difficult week." "I imagine so." Without further ceremony he led us into the entrance hall. Few private residences I had visited rivaled Blackwood House for richness of decoration. Marble columns supported a carved gallery overhead. Oil portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow us as we crossed the polished floor. A great staircase swept upward beneath an immense stained-glass window depicting St. Michael defeating the dragon. Yet despite such magnificence the house felt curiously empty. No voices, no servants moving about, only the faint ticking of a distant clock. Holmes paused beneath the stained glass. "How many remain in the house?" "Miss Eleanor." "The secretary?" "Mr. Victor Harrow is still here." "The physician?" "He has departed." "The rest?" "The servants continue their duties." Holmes nodded. "Kindly take us first to the room where Sir Alister died." The butler hesitated. "Miss Pembroke wished first to meet." "The room, if you please." There was something in Holmes's tone that admitted no debate. Within moments we found ourselves upon the second floor before an imposing walnut door. Bennet unlocked it. This was Sir Alister's study. I entered behind Holmes. The chamber reflected its owner with remarkable fidelity. Books occupied every wall from floor to ceiling. Cabinets displayed rare manuscripts beneath locked glass. A massive oak desk stood before the fireplace, its surface still bearing neatly arranged correspondence, as though the master of the house had merely stepped away for a few minutes. Heavy curtains admitted little daylight. The air smelled faintly of old leather, tobacco, and sealing wax. Holmes remained motionless just inside the doorway. I knew better than to disturb him. His eyes traveled slowly from ceiling to carpet with such extraordinary attention that I almost imagined he could perceive events long vanished. Finally he crossed to the desk. "Sir Alister was seated here?" "When you found him." "He had collapsed beside the chair." Holmes examined the carpet. "No blood."
"There was none."
"No sign of violence."
"None."
He crouched beside the chair. "What is it?" I asked. Instead of replying, Holmes withdrew a small magnifying lens. He studied the polished wooden floor for nearly a minute. At last he smiled very faintly. "Watson." "Yes?" "Observe this." I bent beside him. At first I saw nothing. Then, catching the light from the window, I noticed several minute scratches in the varnish. "They appear insignificant." "So they do." "What made them?" Holmes rose. "Something with metal feet." "A chair?"
"No."
"A walking stick?" He shook his head. "The scratches form a perfect triangle." I examined them again. He was right. 3 tiny marks, precisely arranged. "What possesses 3 metal points?" I asked. Holmes slipped the lens into his pocket. "That is precisely the question." Before I could inquire further, footsteps approached in the corridor. A young woman entered. She could not have exceeded 26 years of age. Though plainly dressed in mourning black, there was remarkable composure in her features. Grief had touched her, certainly, but had not diminished either her intelligence or quiet dignity. Mr. March introduced her. "Miss Eleanor Pembroke." She greeted us politely. "Mr. Holmes, my condolences." "Thank you." Her voice was calm, though weary. "I fear I have brought you into a matter that borders upon absurdity." Holmes held up the mysterious letter. I have learned never to dismiss absurdities. You believe my uncle wrote it? I believe someone wished it to appear so. She clasped her hands tightly. I watched him die. Holmes regarded her steadily. Tell me. She drew a slow breath. My uncle had suffered attacks of the heart before. That evening he dismissed everyone shortly after dinner. No argument?
None.
No visitors?
No.
What occurred next? The butler heard a crash. He entered immediately?
Within moments.
And your uncle? He was already dead. Holmes observed her with quiet intensity. You loved him. She looked surprised. He raised me after my parents died. I thought as much. There followed a brief silence. Then Holmes asked almost casually, Did Sir Alister ever fear someone? Miss Pembroke hesitated.
Yes.
The secretary?
No.
The servants? No. Then whom?
I don't know.
But he feared someone. She nodded. During the last month he repeatedly checked that the doors were locked. Anything else? He burned many old papers. Holmes's expression sharpened.
When?
Nearly every evening. What kind of papers? I never saw. Did he receive unusual correspondence? Several anonymous letters. Where are they now? He burned those as well. Holmes folded his arms. A cautious man. He became... In what respect? He often spoke as though someone from the past intended to return. Holmes exchanged a brief glance with me. Just then another gentleman entered without knocking. He was perhaps 35, impeccably dressed, clean-shaven, and possessed of handsome but rather cold features. His dark eyes moved rapidly from Holmes to myself before settling upon Miss Pembroke. I was told detectives had arrived. His tone contained neither welcome nor concern. Mr. March spoke quietly. Mr. Victor Harrow, Sir Alister's secretary. Holmes bowed slightly. You served Sir Alister long? 8 years. You managed his correspondence? I did. Holmes withdrew the mysterious letter. Have you seen this? Harrow's face changed almost imperceptibly. What do you think? I think someone enjoys cruel tricks. You recognize the handwriting?
Certainly.
It resembles Sir Alister's? It is Sir Alister's. Holmes watched him carefully. You sound very certain. I handled thousands of his letters, and yet this one troubles you. It should trouble anyone. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. I understand you and Sir Alister disagreed shortly before his death. For the first time the secretary appeared uncomfortable. A minor business matter. The nature of it? I advised against a financial decision. Which was? I failed to see its relevance. Holmes smiled. I often encounter people who fail to see relevance. The secretary stiffened. My employer is dead. Precisely. And someone has forged his writing. Perhaps. I have answered enough. With a curt nod he left the room. Holmes watched the closed door for several seconds. What do you think of him? I asked. He is concealing something. Murder? Holmes looked amused. My dear Watson, concealment is common. Murder is exceptional. We continued our examination of the study. Holmes inspected the fireplace, sifted the ashes, measured the distance between desk and window, and even counted the books upon one shelf before suddenly asking Bennet, Has anything in this room been moved since Sir Alister's death? No, sir. Nothing? The butler reflected. Only... Yes? The clock. Holmes turned instantly. A handsome French mantel clock rested above... Holmes turned instantly. A handsome French mantel clock rested above the fireplace. It stopped when Sir Alister fell. You reset it?
No.
Who did? Mr. Harrow. Holmes approached the clock. Its polished brass reflected the dim afternoon light. He lifted it carefully. Beneath it lay a faint rectangular patch upon the marble, cleaner than the surrounding surface. He smiled once more.
What is it now? I asked.
The clock has occupied this position for years. Obviously. It was recently moved, but Bennet said he believes only the hands were adjusted. Holmes replaced it exactly. The clock itself traveled several inches. He tapped gently upon the mantel. A hollow sound answered. Without another word he examined the carved woodwork surrounding the fireplace. His fingers stopped upon an almost invisible groove. Pressing it lightly, he released a concealed panel no larger than a cigar box. Nothing. Only dust. Someone had emptied it. Holmes closed the compartment. When was the clock moved? He asked quietly. The butler frowned. I cannot say. I can. Holmes brushed a particle of fresh plaster from his fingertips. It was moved after Sir Alister died. The room fell silent. Miss Pembroke stared at the empty hiding-place. My uncle never mentioned such a compartment. I imagine very few people knew of it. Holmes's face had become unreadable. He walked slowly toward the window overlooking the mist-covered gardens. Beyond them, through the bare trees, I caught sight of a small stone structure standing apart from the house. "The family crypt?" Holmes asked. "Yes," replied Bennet. "It was there someone broke in." Holmes continued to gaze toward it. For nearly a minute he remained silent. Then, almost to himself, he murmured, "The dead keep their promises." He slipped the mysterious letter back into his pocket.
"Watson."
"Yes? I believe our next destination has already been indicated. The crypt?" "Exactly." He turned toward the waiting household. "If someone wished to frighten you, they have succeeded." He paused. "But if someone wished merely to frighten you—" His eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Then why remove whatever was hidden behind that clock?" No one answered. Outside, the November wind sighed through the ancient yews, and somewhere across the estate a raven gave a single harsh cry. It was an oddly melancholy sound, though none of us yet realized it. The secrets buried within the Pembroke family crypt had already claimed one life, and before another night had ended, they would claim a second. There are moments in every investigation when the visible facts cease to satisfy the reasoning mind, and one must venture into those darker corners where history, superstition, and human fear intertwine. It was with such reflections that I accompanied Sherlock Holmes across the frost-covered gardens of Blackwood House toward the Pembroke family crypt. The afternoon had faded into that peculiar grey twilight which November bestows upon London long before evening. A thin mist drifted over the lawns, blurring the statues and ancient hedgerows until they appeared like silent sentinels watching our progress. The bare branches overhead swayed gently, though I felt scarcely any wind. Holmes walked several paces ahead, his hands clasped behind his back, his keen eyes missing nothing. From time to time he paused, not because he had found anything obvious, but because some trifling detail had disturbed the invisible order he always seemed able to perceive. "You observe the grass, Watson?" I looked downward. "It has been flattened." "Yes." "By the caretaker?" "Perhaps." He crouched beside the narrow stone path leading to the crypt, or perhaps by someone considerably lighter. He pointed toward a shallow impression. "What do you make of that?" I examined it carefully. "It resembles a footprint." "Indeed. A woman's?" Holmes smiled. "You improve, but not Miss Pembroke's." "How can you tell?" "The heel." I looked again. The mark was remarkably narrow. "It is considerably smaller." "Exactly." Holmes rose and continued walking. "The police no doubt observed this." "I imagine they did. They ignored it." "Why?" "Because it did not fit their theory." That, I knew, was a failing Holmes encountered with distressing regularity. At last we reached the crypt. It stood some 50 yards from the main house, built of weathered granite darkened by decades of rain and soot. Ivy climbed one side, while moss covered much of the roof. A heavy iron gate guarded the entrance. The padlock hung broken. Holmes examined it before entering. "This was not forced. It appears broken. It was opened with a key, and afterward damaged." "Precisely. To imitate burglary." He nodded approvingly. Inside, the air turned noticeably colder. Our footsteps echoed softly upon the stone floor. Rows of marble shelves lined the walls, each bearing the name of a departed member of the Pembroke family. Candles had long since burned away, leaving only empty brass holders and the faint odor of wax. At the center stood the large stone coffin of Sir Geoffrey Pembroke, the family patriarch who had died nearly a century before. Holmes removed his gloves. "Someone wished us to believe this place was searched. You think otherwise?" "I think someone came here with a definite purpose." He lit a lantern which Bennet had thoughtfully provided. Its warm light danced across the ancient stonework. For several minutes Holmes wandered silently around the chamber. He measured distances with his eye. He tapped gently upon sections of wall. He even examined the accumulated dust with a magnifying lens. Finally he stopped before a marble tablet. "This inscription is curious." I joined him. The words read, "Faith keeps what time cannot." A family motto? Possibly. Holmes brushed away more dust.
"No."
"What do you mean?" "It has been cleaned." "Recently?" "Within days." The remainder of the crypt lay buried beneath years of undisturbed dust. Only those 4 words had been wiped perfectly clean. Who would clean a single inscription? I asked. "Someone searching." "For what?" Holmes did not answer. Instead, he examined the joints between the marble blocks. His fingertips paused. Then, almost imperceptibly, he smiled. I bent closer. One section appeared no different from... He smiled. I bent closer. One section appeared no different from another. Holmes inserted the blade of his penknife into a narrow seam. There came a soft click. The entire marble panel swung inward. Behind it lay a hidden recess scarcely a foot deep. It was empty. Holmes remained utterly expressionless. "A second hiding-place," I murmured, "which has recently been emptied." I frowned. "The compartment behind the clock, and this one, they are connected." "I believe so." "What was kept here?" "I cannot yet say." He examined the interior. A thin layer of dust remained untouched except for one clear rectangular outline. "Whatever rested here," he said quietly, "was approximately 8 inches long." "A document box?" "Perhaps." He leaned nearer. "No." "What have you found?" "A faint odor. I smelled nothing." "Lavender?" I laughed softly. "Surely crypts are not commonly scented." "They are not." Holmes closed the panel. "Someone carried lavender." "A woman?" "Perhaps." Again that tantalizing word. Outside footsteps approached. Bennett entered. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Holmes." "Yes?" "Inspector Gregson has arrived." Holmes's eyebrows rose slightly. "Our friends from Scotland Yard waste little time." Within minutes Inspector Tobias Gregson descended into the crypt, brushing dust from his overcoat. His broad face brightened upon seeing Holmes. "I suspected I'd find you poking about underground." Holmes inclined his head politely. "Good afternoon, Gregson." The inspector shook my hand warmly. Then, lowering his voice, he said, "I believe we've nearly wrapped this affair up." Holmes looked mildly interested. "Indeed? Mr. Harrow?" "The very man." "What evidence?" Gregson smiled confidently. "He argued with the deceased." "So I hear. He was in debt." "Many men are." "He alone had access to Sir Alister's correspondence." "Naturally." "And his fingerprints were found behind the study clock." I glanced toward Holmes. His expression did not alter. "A convincing collection," said he. Gregson folded his arms. "I knew you'd agree." "I said convincing." The inspector sighed. "There it is." "Why?" "Whenever you use that tone, my dear Gregson, evidence is valuable only when examined alongside what contradicts it." "What contradicts it?" Holmes gestured calmly around the crypt. Gregson frowned. "A broken tomb?" "A staged burglary. We know someone entered, but not to steal." The inspector looked impatient. "What then?" Holmes merely smiled. "I shall tell you when I know." Gregson threw up his hands. "You always do this." "It preserves conversation." The inspector laughed despite himself. "Well, arrest warrant or not, I'll have Harrow by tomorrow." Holmes offered no objection. That, more than anything, surprised me. When Gregson had departed, I turned immediately toward my friend. "You believe Harrow innocent." "I neither believe nor disbelieve." "You allowed Gregson to continue." "Certainly." "Why?" Holmes began walking slowly toward the exit. "Because the truly guilty rarely interfere while the police pursue another." I reflected upon that as we emerged into the fading daylight. The fog had thickened considerably. The house appeared almost spectral beyond the bare trees. As we crossed the lawn, Holmes suddenly stopped. He pointed toward the upper windows. "Third floor." "What of it?" "The curtain." I looked carefully. One curtain moved ever so slightly. "Someone watches." Before I could distinguish a face, the curtain fell still. "Which room?" "The old library, I believe," said Bennett. "Occupied?" "No one." Holmes said nothing further. Instead, he altered course and entered the house through a side door. The servants appeared uneasy. Conversation ceased whenever Holmes approached. Even the footmen avoided one another's eyes. Fear had settled upon Blackwood House like another layer of dust. Late that evening Holmes requested permission to inspect Sir Alister's personal library. It occupied nearly the entire third floor. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Rare volumes filled glass-fronted cabinets. A rolling ladder moved along polished rails. The room smelled pleasantly of old paper and cedar wood. Holmes wandered without apparent purpose. He selected books almost at random. One volume he opened, another he ignored, a third he merely weighed in his hand before returning it. "You are searching for something?" "No." "What then?" "I am allowing something to reveal itself." His eyes settled upon a row of journals. One volume protruded slightly farther than the others. Holmes withdrew it. The title read, "Private Accounts, 1889." The pages had been cut neatly from the binding. Only the cover remained. Holmes examined the empty spine. "Taken recently." "A thief?" "No." "Then who?" "The person who already knew precisely what he sought." As he returned the mutilated ledger to the shelf, something fluttered gently to the carpet. It was a tiny scrap of folded paper. Holmes picked it up. No larger than a postage stamp, it contained only 3 hastily written words. "She knows now." Nothing more. No signature. No date. Holmes folded it carefully into his notebook. "Curious. You think Sir Alister wrote it?"
No.
"Harrow?" "Perhaps." "Miss Pembroke?" He smiled. "My dear Watson." "Yes?" "The temptation to answer questions before collecting facts has ruined many promising investigators." Before I could reply, the grandfather clock somewhere below struck 8. Its echoes rolled slowly through the silent corridors. At that very instant a scream shattered the stillness of Blackwood House. It was a woman's voice, terrified, followed immediately by the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. Holmes had already reached the library door before the final echo faded. "Come, Watson." We raced down the staircase 2 steps at a time. Servants emerged from every direction. Someone shouted that the noise had come from the east wing. As we reached the corridor, Miss Eleanor stood outside her chamber, pale as marble, one trembling hand pressed against the wall. "The window!" she gasped. "He was there!" "Who?" Holmes demanded. I couldn't see his face. Holmes entered the room. The window stood open despite the freezing air. The curtains billowed inward. A flower vase lay shattered upon the floor. Holmes knelt at once. There, upon the polished wooden sill, was a single object left behind by the intruder. It was not a weapon, nor a tool. It was a fresh envelope. Upon its front, written in the unmistakable hand of the dead Sir Alister Pembroke, appeared only 4 chilling words. "For Watson, read alone." There are occasions in a man's life when reason and emotion stand in such violent opposition that even the most disciplined mind finds itself shaken. I confess without hesitation that I experienced such a conflict when Sherlock Holmes placed into my hands the envelope which had so mysteriously appeared upon the window-sill of Miss Eleanor Pembroke's chamber. It bore my own name. Not merely Dr. Watson, but in full. Dr. John H. Watson. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was the same firm, elegant script as the previous letter, the very hand which 3 celebrated experts had declared to be that of the late Sir Alister Pembroke. For several moments I simply stared at it. Holmes watched me with an expression that revealed nothing.
"Well, Watson."
"It is addressed to me." "So it appears. But I never met Sir Alister." "Precisely." Miss Pembroke, though still visibly shaken by the intruder's appearance, looked from Holmes to myself. "Surely you should open it." Holmes raised a finger. "Not yet. You wish to examine it?" "I wish to examine everything." He accepted the envelope from my hand with extraordinary care. Producing his lens, he studied first the paper, then the seal, and finally the address itself. No wax.
No.
No fingerprints visible. I should hardly expect any. The paper is identical to the previous letter. He held it toward the lamp. The watermark also matches. Mr. March, who had hurried upstairs upon hearing the scream, looked increasingly uneasy. Another impossible letter. Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he weighed the envelope lightly upon one finger.
"Lighter."
"Then the first?" "Considerably." He turned to me. "My dear Watson, would you kindly open it, but tear only the upper edge?" I did as requested. Inside lay a single folded sheet. Nothing else. The paper appeared fresh. The ink had scarcely faded. I unfolded it carefully. The message was painfully brief. "Dr. Watson, you have always trusted the wrong evidence before trusting the right man. Do not repeat the mistake tonight. Ask Holmes why he refuses to speak of the portrait. If he tells you the truth, one innocent life may yet be spared. A friend." I read it twice before passing it silently to Holmes. For the first time since the affair had begun, I detected the faintest alteration in his composure. Not surprise, recognition. It vanished almost instantly. Miss Pembroke stepped nearer. "What does it say?" Holmes folded the paper. "Nothing intended for the household. Then it concerns the investigation?" "It concerns me." I looked at him. "The portrait?" He slipped the letter into his pocketbook. "Holmes. Later, Watson." His tone admitted no argument. That single word was enough to convince me that he had indeed noticed something regarding a portrait, and had deliberately withheld it. It was not the first occasion upon which Holmes had concealed an observation from me. He frequently insisted that premature explanations hindered rather than helped an investigation. Nevertheless, I could not suppress a feeling of uneasiness. Whoever had written the letter knew not only my friendship with Holmes, but also the peculiar habits of our investigations. Such knowledge belonged to a very limited circle. Holmes closed the window. "Our visitor has already gone." "You are certain?" "He remained no longer than necessary." He pointed toward the carpet. A faint trace of damp soil marked the floorboards. The footprints? Unfortunately incomplete. He examined the broken flower vase. It served its purpose. You believe Miss Pembroke threw it? I am certain of it. She nodded. I saw a shadow outside the glass. You did not see the face?
No.
Height? Perhaps a little taller than yourself. Build? Slender. Hat? Aye. Holmes thanked her gently. There is one? Aye. Holmes thanked her gently. There is one question more. Yes? Did the figure appear frightened? She looked puzzled. I had not thought of it. Think now. She closed her eyes for several moments. When I cried out, Yes? He ran immediately. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. After ensuring Miss Pembroke was no longer in immediate distress, Holmes suggested that Bennet assign 2 servants to remain outside her room throughout the night. Only when we had retired to the guest chamber prepared for us did I again return to the mysterious message. Holmes removed his violin from its case and began tuning it with remarkable care. He often sought music when engaged upon difficult problems. I sat opposite him. You have no intention of answering my question. What question? The portrait? He drew the bow slowly across the strings. I wondered how long it would occupy your thoughts. It occupied the anonymous writer's thoughts as well. Exactly. He set the violin aside without playing another note. When we first entered Sir Alister's study, Yes? Did you notice the large oil portrait above the fireplace? I reflected. His wife, perhaps, so everyone would assume. It was not?
No.
Who then? Holmes leaned back. The artist signed it. I failed to observe that. I expected you would. He smiled faintly. The signature had been scratched away. Deliberately? Very. I frowned. Why would anyone destroy an artist's name? They were not attempting to conceal the painter. They wished to conceal the date which appeared beneath the signature, and that matters? It matters enormously. He stood and crossed to the window. The woman in that portrait appears approximately 30 years old. I should agree, if painted when the inscription originally stated. He paused. Then she would have been dead long before Sir Alister claimed to have met her. I stared at him. You mean? I mean nothing. You are withholding your conclusion. I am withholding speculation. That distinction, I knew, was one Holmes considered sacred. He never permitted even the most convincing theory to outrun the available evidence. There came a discreet knock. Bennet entered. Forgive the interruption, Mr. Holmes. What is it? The inspector has returned. Gregson? No, sir. Who then? Inspector Lestrade. Holmes's eyebrows rose. Our friends grow numerous. Within minutes, Inspector Lestrade joined us. Smaller and sharper featured than Gregson, he carried the unmistakable expression of a man whose patience had been exhausted before breakfast. I've come from London. Urgent? I should say so. He removed a folded document from his pocket. The handwriting experts. Holmes accepted it. They've changed their opinion.
Oh!
They remain convinced both letters were written by Sir Alister. Indeed. Lestrade paused dramatically. They now believe the ink itself is older than the paper. Even Holmes looked up. Repeat that. The ink appears several years old. The paper is recent. Exactly. Impossible. So said the laboratory. Silence settled over the room. Finally Holmes spoke. No, not impossible. Lestrade folded his arms. You've thought of something, perhaps?
What?
Holmes ignored the question. Instead he asked, Did they identify the ink? A rare formulation no longer manufactured. When was it discontinued? About 6 years ago. Holmes thanked him. As soon as the inspector departed, I turned toward my companion. What explanation exists? He smiled. Several. I can think of none. That is because you assume the writing occurred when the letter was composed. I blinked. Good heavens, he nodded. The words may have been written years ago. And placed upon fresh paper later? Not quite. What then? I have not yet proved it. He would say no more. Near midnight sleep proved impossible. The house seemed alive with small sounds. Floorboards creaked. Doors settled within their frames. Somewhere distant a clock chimed the quarter hour. At length Holmes extinguished the lamp. Rest if you can, Watson. And you? I intend to think. Those were the last words exchanged between us before silence claimed the room. I cannot say how much time had passed when a faint metallic sound awakened me. Not loud. Merely I opened my eyes. Moonlight filtered through the curtains. Across the chamber Holmes was already awake. Indeed, he was sitting upright in bed, his gaze fixed upon the door. He raised one finger, bidding me remain perfectly silent. Again came the sound, this time from the corridor. Very slowly Holmes reached beneath his pillow and withdrew his revolver. I did likewise. Neither of us spoke. The handle of our bedroom door turned very slowly, almost imperceptibly. Someone outside was attempting to enter without making the slightest sound. The door opened no more than an inch, then stopped. For several long seconds nothing moved. Suddenly Holmes sprang from the bed with astonishing speed, crossed the room in 3 silent strides, and flung the door wide open. The corridor beyond was empty. Only darkness stretched toward the distant staircase. No footsteps, no retreating shadow, nothing. Holmes bent quietly toward the carpet. There, just beyond the threshold, lay a single object, a black chess piece, the White King's Knight. Holmes picked it up between thumb and forefinger. He studied it for several moments before slipping it carefully into his dressing-gown pocket. His expression had become extraordinarily grave. "What is it?" I whispered. He looked toward the silent corridor. "Our opponent," he said quietly, "has just invited us to begin the real game." And for the first time since our arrival at Blackwood House, I saw in Sherlock Holmes not merely curiosity, but the unmistakable spark of anticipation that appeared only when he recognized an adversary worthy of his intellect. I have frequently observed that Sherlock Holmes became his most dangerous when outward appearances suggested complete indifference. During the years of our friendship, Scotland Yard often mistook his silence for uncertainty, when in truth it signified that his mind had already passed beyond the obvious facts, and was arranging them into some hidden order invisible to ordinary observers. The morning following the appearance of the mysterious chess piece found Holmes in unusually high spirits. Long before the household had risen, he had completed a thorough examination of the corridor outside our room. By the time I awoke, he had already returned from a solitary walk through the grounds and was calmly preparing coffee over the small spirit lamp that Mrs. Bennet had thoughtfully provided. "You have been busy," I remarked. "So has our visitor. You found something?" "Several things." He handed me my cup before taking his accustomed place beside the window. Outside the mist hung lower than ever, reducing Blackwood House to little more than a silhouette against a colorless sky. "The footprints?" I asked.
No.
"The chess piece?" "Merely a conversation. I confess I fail to understand." "You will." His answers, though perfectly sincere, rarely satisfied immediate curiosity. A knock interrupted us. It was Bennet. "Mr. Holmes, Inspector Gregson has returned?" Holmes smiled faintly. I suspected he would. The old butler hesitated. "He has brought officers with him." "And Mr. Harrow has been arrested." I looked sharply toward Holmes. "The secretary?" Bennet nodded gravely. "They have taken him downstairs." Holmes rose immediately. "Call me, Watson." The drawing-room had become an uncomfortable theatre of accusation. Inspector Gregson stood beside the fireplace with evident satisfaction while 2 uniformed constables remained close to Victor Harrow. The secretary appeared pale from lack of sleep, yet remarkably composed. Miss Eleanor Pembroke stood near the window, clearly distressed. Mr. Edwin March occupied a chair in complete silence. Gregson greeted Holmes with confidence. "I've done what had to be done, so I understand. The evidence is overwhelming." Holmes removed his gloves. "I should be delighted to hear it." Gregson produced a notebook. "First, financial motive." Holmes inclined his head. "Mr. Harrow owes considerable sums," the secretary answered quietly. "I never denied it." "Second," continued Gregson, "witnesses confirm a heated argument between yourself and Sir Alister 3 days before his death. You threatened to resign." "I did." Gregson paused dramatically. "We searched Mr. Harrow's room." "And discovered?" The inspector laid a small brass key upon the table. Holmes picked it up. "The hidden compartment behind the study clock. You recognize it?" "It fits." Gregson smiled broadly. "We tested it." Holmes examined the key with considerable interest. "Anything else?" "A bundle of burned correspondence." "Recovered?" "Only fragments." "What remained?" Gregson opened another envelope. "The words promise, portrait, and November 17th. Miss Pembroke gasped softly. Gregson folded his arms. "Still unconvinced?" Holmes remained silent. The inspector mistook this for surrender. "I thought as much." At last Holmes spoke. "My dear Gregson." "Yes?" "May I ask one insignificant question?" The inspector sighed. "Go on. When exactly did you discover this key?" "This morning." Where? Inside Mr. Harrow's traveling case. Locked?
No.
Gregson frowned. What difference does that make? Holmes returned the key. A murderer clever enough to fabricate letters from beyond the grave, he paused, would scarcely preserve the key to his crime inside an unlocked suitcase. Gregson frowned. Criminals make mistakes. They do. So? Holmes smiled politely. The truly intelligent ones seldom make such convenient mistakes. The inspector's confidence diminished slightly. You think someone planted it. I merely observe the possibility. Gregson looked irritated. You always observe possibilities. They generally prove useful. The inspector turned abruptly toward Harrow. Do you deny ownership? The secretary answered immediately. I have never seen that key. No one believes you. I expected as much. Holmes watched him carefully. Mr. Harrow, the prisoner looked up. You appear less concerned than an innocent man usually does. A faint smile crossed Harrow's face. Because someone far more important than I is in danger. The room became perfectly still. Miss Pembroke stepped forward. What do you mean? He looked at her sadly, but remained silent. Gregson struck the table impatiently. No riddles. I have none to offer. Holmes spoke gently. Whom do you seek to protect? Again silence. Finally Harrow replied, If I answer, another person dies. After the secretary had been escorted away, Holmes requested permission to inspect Harrow's bedroom before it was sealed. Gregson reluctantly agreed. The room occupied the western corner of the second floor. Compared with the luxury enjoyed elsewhere in the house, it was modestly furnished. A writing desk, a narrow bed, several shelves of books, one traveling trunk. Holmes ignored the obvious. Instead, he walked directly toward the fireplace. What interests you there? I asked. The ashes. He knelt. For nearly 5 minutes he examined them grain by grain. At length he selected one tiny fragment with his tweezers. What have you found? A thread? A thread? He handed it to me. It appeared to be ordinary black silk. No! Holmes shook his head. Look closer. Using my pocket lens, I observed an almost invisible streak of silver woven through the fibers. It is unusual. Very, he smiled. It matches nothing in this room. He next examined the wardrobe. Only 3 suits hung inside, perfectly arranged. Mr. Harrow is orderly. So it would appear. Holmes lightly touched the coat sleeves, then suddenly asked, What's... Yes? How many coats? And how many pairs of boots? I counted. 4. Exactly! What of it? 1 man. Certainly. 4 pairs? I shrugged. Perhaps. Holmes looked amused. My dear fellow. Yes? The mud upon each pair differs. One indeed carried fresh garden soil, another dry London dust. The third appeared almost new. The fourth was completely clean. Too clean. They have been polished? No. Holmes held one boot toward the window. The leather has been washed. Why? To remove something. Mud? Possibly. He placed the boot down, but not by its owner. As we prepared to leave the room, Holmes's attention was caught by a small framed photograph resting upon the desk. It showed Sir Alister standing beside several younger men before an imposing country estate. Holmes removed the photograph from its frame. Something slipped from behind it. A folded receipt, dated only 3 weeks earlier, from a London bookseller. The purchased item consisted of a single entry, 1 antique chess set. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Curious. I remembered instantly. The night. Precisely. He folded the receipt into his notebook. The game began before Sir Alister died. That afternoon Holmes requested tea in the library. To my surprise, he appeared less interested in conversation than in watching the household. Servants came and went. Miss Pembroke crossed the hall twice. Mr. March remained occupied with estate documents. Bennet supervised quietly. Holmes observed all. At length he murmured, Someone is waiting. For what? For news of Harrow. Why? Because they planted the evidence. You are certain now? I am certain enough. Just then the housemaid entered carrying fresh coal. As she bent before the fireplace, Holmes suddenly asked, How long have you served here? The girl looked startled. Nearly 6 years, sir. You knew Sir Alister well? As well as servants ever do. He trusted Mr. Harrow? Oh, yes. Entirely? She hesitated. Holmes thanked her pleasantly. When she had departed, I looked at him curiously. You frightened her. No. She appeared nervous. She appeared loyal. To Harrow? He looked toward the door through which she had vanished. No. Then to whom? Before Holmes could answer, hurried footsteps echoed through the corridor. Bennet burst into the library, his composure utterly gone. "Mr. Holmes, what has happened? The prisoner, Harrow? He's disappeared." Gregson came racing behind him, breathing heavily. "He escaped." Holmes rose at once. "Impossible. We left him locked in the morning-room while arrangements were made to transport him." "And?" "When the constable returned." Gregson's face had turned pale. "The room was empty." "The window?" "Locked." "The chimney?"
"No."
"The doors?" "Still bolted from outside." Holmes's expression became strangely thoughtful. "A locked room." Gregson nodded grimly. "No one entered. No one left, and yet the prisoner has vanished." Holmes walked calmly toward the morning-room. The constables stood bewildered outside. Inside, everything appeared undisturbed. The chair upon which Harrow had sat remained in place. The curtains were still drawn. The single window was firmly latched. Holmes surveyed the room in silence. Then his gaze settled upon the table. There, lying exactly where Harrow had been seated only minutes earlier, rested another envelope, cream-colored, freshly placed, addressed not to Miss Pembroke, nor to myself, but to Sherlock Holmes. Across its front, in Sir Alister Pembroke's unmistakable handwriting, were written 6 deliberate words. "You arrested the wrong man, Mr. Holmes. If there exists one circumstance calculated to excite both the imagination of the public and the despair of the police, it is the mystery of a locked room. During my association with Sherlock Holmes I witnessed several such affairs, and I learned that they were never supernatural. They merely awaited a sufficiently patient observer. Nevertheless, I freely admit that the disappearance of Victor Harrow from the morning-room of Blackwood House perplexed me more completely than any similar incident I had yet encountered. The room itself was modest in size and overlooked the eastern gardens. It possessed but one door, which had remained bolted from the outside, and a single sash window, still secured from within. The fireplace was narrow, incapable of admitting a child, much less a grown man. The walls were solid oak paneling, while the ceiling showed no trap or concealed hatch. Yet Harrow was gone. Inspector Gregson paced the carpet with increasing agitation. "It cannot be done," he exclaimed for perhaps the 10th time. "A man does not dissolve into thin air." Holmes did not reply. He stood beside the empty chair where the secretary had last been seen, the mysterious envelope resting unopened in his hand. The room had been carefully preserved since the discovery of Harrow's disappearance, and Holmes insisted that no one should move so much as a single object until his examination had concluded. He first inspected the lock, then the hinges. Then, to Gregson's evident irritation, he devoted nearly 5 minutes to studying the carpet beneath the chair. "What do you hope to find?" asked the inspector. "The reason you failed." Gregson snorted. "I've searched every inch." "I do not doubt it." Holmes knelt and ran his fingertips lightly over the carpet. "Watson." "Yes?" "Observe the fibers." I crouched beside him. "They seem perfectly ordinary." "Exactly." "I confess, you expected them to be crushed." I looked again. The carpet around the chair should indeed have borne deeper impressions if a struggling prisoner had suddenly escaped. Instead, the fibers remained almost perfectly upright. "What does it signify?" Holmes smiled faintly. "That Mr. Harrow left this chair considerably earlier than everyone believes." Gregson folded his arms, but the constable checked on him. "Did he?" "He heard Harrow answer through the door." "He heard a voice." The inspector frowned. "You mean—" "I mean only that voices possess many useful qualities." Before Gregson could reply, Holmes turned his attention to the envelope. "It would appear our correspondent remains punctual." With extraordinary care he opened it. Inside lay another single sheet. He read it silently. His expression remained unreadable. "Well—" Without a word he handed it to me. The message read, "Mr. Holmes, you pride yourself upon observing what others overlook. Then observe the man who never lies. He has deceived everyone. The portrait remembers what the living have forgotten. You are still one move behind." There was no signature, only the same elegant handwriting. Gregson read the note over my shoulder. More nonsense. Holmes folded the paper. My shoulder. More nonsense. Holmes folded the paper.
"No."
"You see meaning?" "I see intention." "Whose?" "The writer wishes me to look somewhere very specific." "Then don't." Holmes smiled. "My dear Gregson, whenever someone attempts to direct my attention, I first ask what they hope I shall fail to notice elsewhere." The inspector sighed heavily. "I never understand you." "So I have often observed." Holmes requested that every servant of the household assemble in the dining-hall. Within 20 minutes the staff stood in a quiet line beneath the solemn portraits of long-dead Pembrokes. There were only 6 in permanent service: Charles Bennet, the butler; Mrs. Bennet, the housekeeper; Emily Foster, the parlour-maid; Thomas Briggs, the gardener; Arthur Wells, the coachman; and young William Carter, the footman. Holmes regarded them one by one. "I shall ask only a few questions." No one spoke. "When did each of you last see Mr. Harrow?" Their answers differed only slightly. Each had encountered him some time before breakfast. Each described him as calm. None believed him capable of murder. Gregson looked increasingly impatient. "This proves nothing." On the contrary. Holmes's eyes rested upon Bennet. "You have served the Pembrokes many years." 32, sir. "You knew Sir Alister better than anyone." "I should not presume that." "You need not presume." Holmes spoke gently. "Did he ever lie?" The old butler seemed genuinely surprised. "Never." "Not once?" "He disliked dishonesty." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "The anonymous letter states that the man who never lies has deceived everyone." Gregson shrugged. "So? So who in this house possesses such a reputation?" Silence followed. At length Mrs. Bennet answered quietly, "Sir Alister." Holmes looked at her. "You are certain?" He was strict, but truthful, always. Holmes thanked her. As the servants departed, I joined him beside the window. "You think the letters refer to Sir Alister himself. I think they invite us to. You distrust that. I distrust everything that arrives anonymously." That afternoon Holmes insisted upon returning to Sir Alister's study. The room remained exactly as we had left it. He walked immediately to the portrait above the fireplace. The woman gazed serenely from the canvas, dressed in dark green silk, one gloved hand resting upon an ornate chair. Holmes studied it for several minutes. Then, to my astonishment, he climbed upon the fireplace surround and removed the painting from its hooks. Hidden behind it was not a safe, nor another compartment, only the wall. Yet Holmes appeared satisfied. "What have you discovered?" I looked blankly. "There is less behind the upper edge." "What does that mean?" "The portrait has been removed." "Recently?" "Within the last fortnight." "But why replace it?" Holmes carefully turned the painting over. The rear canvas bore several penciled numbers. One corner had been repaired. More interesting still, someone had written 3 initials upon the wooden frame. "E.P. Eleanor Pembroke," I suggested. "So it would appear. But why write upon the frame?" Holmes remained silent. His fingers traced the initials thoughtfully. Late in the afternoon we visited the village church, where Sir Alister's funeral had taken place only days before. Holmes wished to speak with Reverend Matthew Collins, an elderly clergyman who had known the Pembroke family for nearly 20 years. The Reverend received us warmly. "A tragic business." "So I understand," Holmes replied. "You knew Sir Alister well?" "As well as any parish priest." Holmes glanced around the quiet vestry. "Was he troubled before his death?" The clergyman hesitated. "Very." "In what way?" "He feared an old promise." Holmes looked up sharply. "A promise?" "Yeah." "He never explained, but mentioned it repeatedly?" The Reverend nodded. "He once told me—" The old man paused uneasily. "That the dead remember promises longer than the living." Holmes exchanged a brief glance with me. The phrase echoed disturbingly with the mysterious letter. "The dead keep their promises." The Reverend continued. "On the evening before his death he asked whether confession could erase a mistake committed 30 years earlier. What answer did you give?" "I told him repentance matters more than secrecy." "And?" He only smiled sadly. Night had already fallen by the time we returned to Blackwood House. The atmosphere within the mansion had altered noticeably. Word of Harrow's impossible escape had spread among both servants and villagers. Doors were locked earlier. Voices dropped to whispers. Even Gregson appeared less certain than before. Holmes, however, seemed curiously invigorated. After dinner he requested access to every clock in the house. "Every clock?" asked Miss Pembroke. "Without exception. There were 12. Grandfather clocks, mantel clocks, French carriage clocks, even an old bracket clock in the library." Holmes examined each with almost obsessive care. At last he stopped before the great-grandfather clock in the entrance hall. He opened its case, looked inside, then smiled. "There you are." "What is it?" I asked eagerly. Instead of answering, he withdrew a tiny folded slip of paper wedged deep within the wooden casing, no larger than a visiting card. Upon it appeared only a single sentence. "The third key opens nothing." Gregson stared. "Another message." Holmes slipped it quietly into his notebook. "No." "No? This one was never meant to be found." "How can you tell?" because our correspondent hid it too well. Near 11 o'clock Holmes finally retired. I had scarcely begun to undress when he spoke from across the room. "Watts?" "Yes?" "Remain awake tonight. You expect another visitor?" "I expect someone to search." "For what?" "The thing they believe I have already discovered." "And have you?" Holmes smiled. "I hope not." Those words puzzled me greatly. The lamps were extinguished. Darkness settled over the room. Only the faint glow of moonlight entered through the curtains. An hour passed. Then another. The house lay silent. Shortly after midnight came the unmistakable sound of slow footsteps in the corridor. They stopped outside our door. Neither Holmes nor I moved. A key turned gently in the lock. The door opened. A shadow slipped silently inside. Slender. Face concealed beneath a dark cloak. The intruder moved directly toward Holmes's coat, which hung upon a chair. Without hesitation the figure searched every pocket with astonishing speed. Holmes remained perfectly still. The stranger found nothing. For one brief instant moonlight fell across a gloved hand. Upon the wrist gleamed a curious silver signet ring engraved with a raven spreading its wings. The intruder froze. Some instinct had warned him. He turned sharply toward the bed. At that exact moment Holmes struck a match. The tiny flame illuminated the room. "Good evening," said Holmes calmly. The cloaked figure sprang backward. For the briefest fraction of a second I glimpsed a pale face beneath the hood, and recognized it. Before I could utter a word, the intruder hurled the lamp to the floor. The room plunged instantly into darkness. A window shattered. Cold night air rushed inside. By the time Holmes and I reached the broken glass, the mysterious visitor had vanished into the fog. Holmes remained staring into the darkness for several moments. Then, with unusual gravity, he spoke only 6 words. "I feared it might be them." I had never before heard Sherlock Holmes use that particular pronoun. Not him, not her, but them. For the first time since the case began, I realized with growing unease that we were no longer pursuing a single hidden adversary. We had stumbled into a conspiracy. There are few qualities more remarkable in Sherlock Holmes than his ability to preserve an outward calm at the precise moment when another man would betray excitement. The events of the previous night, particularly the mysterious intruder's escape, and Holmes's startling remark that we were confronting not one adversary but several, might well have thrown a less disciplined investigator into confusion. Yet when I descended to breakfast the following morning, I found my companion seated comfortably before the fire, absorbed in the pages of the Times, as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. Only the untouched breakfast upon his plate suggested that his thoughts lay elsewhere. "You slept little," I observed. "Not at all. You have reached a conclusion." "I have abandoned 3, I smiled. "Which is often the same thing with you. It is the necessary price of accuracy." He folded the newspaper. "Our visitor last night was left-handed. From the broken window?"
No.
"The signet ring?" Holmes shook his head. "My coat?" He searched its left pocket first. "That proves only habit." He sipped his coffee. "A right-handed man naturally searches from right to left. A left-handed man does the reverse." Before I could reply, Bennet entered carrying the Morning Post. "There is only one letter, sir." Holmes accepted it. It was addressed to Miss Eleanor Pembroke. The seal was ordinary. The handwriting, however, caused Bennet to blanch. "It cannot be—" Holmes turned the envelope over. "It is." Again the unmistakable hand of Sir Alister Pembroke. Miss Pembroke herself entered the breakfast-room a moment later. Seeing the letter, she stopped abruptly. "My uncle's writing." Holmes nodded gravely. "You should open it." Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. A single sheet slipped into her hands. She read the first line, then uttered a faint cry. "What is it?" I asked. Without speaking, she passed the letter to Holmes. He read it once, then silently handed it to me. It contained only these words: "My dear Eleanor, if Mr. Holmes removes the portrait today, do not stop him. It is the only honest thing left in this house. Trust no tears. Ah, Pembroke." Holmes folded the letter carefully. Miss Pembroke looked at him anxiously. "You intended to examine the portrait?" "I intended precisely that." She seemed genuinely bewildered. "Then how could whoever wrote this know?" Holmes answered quietly, "Because they expected me to." Within half an hour the portrait once again rested upon the library table. This time Holmes examined it with scientific precision. He measured the canvas. He inspected every brushstroke through his lens. He even removed the frame entirely. Gregson, who had returned with fresh determination, watched impatiently. "I've never known a murderer hide inside a painting." Holmes smiled. "No." "Then why waste time?" "Because portraits tell lies. They're paintings." "Exactly." He placed the canvas upon 2 chairs beneath the window. "Watson." "Yes? What strikes you first?" I studied the portrait carefully. The woman possessed striking beauty. Dark hair, grey eyes, an expression at once intelligent and melancholy. Behind her stood heavy velvet curtains. One hand rested upon an ornate chair. The other held a small silver locket. I noticed nothing unusual. Holmes pointed with his cane. "The light! It falls from the left, yet the window behind her stands on the right. I hadn't observed that. Very few would." He next indicated the shadow beneath the chair. "It contradicts the first." Gregson laughed. "Artists make mistakes. This artist did not." "How do you know?" Holmes turned the painting over. "The original signature has been scratched away." "So? It belonged to Augustus Leland." Gregson frowned. "The Royal Academy painter?" "The same. He wasn't careless." "Precisely." Holmes smiled faintly. "This painting has been altered." A silence followed. "Altered?" I repeated. "Someone repainted portions." "Which portions?" Holmes touched the woman's face. "Here and the locket." He tapped gently upon the painted jewelry. "The original object beneath differs." Miss Pembroke looked astonished. "My uncle treasured this portrait. I believe he feared it." Holmes requested permission to borrow several small bottles from my medical case. "What do you intend?" "A harmless experiment." Using a soft cloth and a delicate chemical solution, he applied the slightest touch to one corner of the painted locket. Nothing happened. Very gradually, the upper layer softened. Gregson leaned forward. Good heavens! A different shape emerged beneath. Not a locket, a tiny silver key, painted over. Holmes sat back. As I suspected, Miss Pembroke covered her mouth. "My uncle changed the painting." "No." Holmes looked toward her. "Someone changed it after the artist completed it. The discovery transformed the atmosphere within the room." Gregson immediately declared that the hidden key represented another clue against Victor Harrow. "He altered the painting." Holmes looked almost amused. "My dear Gregson." "What now?" "Mr. Harrow possesses many talents. Indeed, painting is not among them." "How can you know?" "The pigments." He pointed toward the altered section. "The restoration was performed at least 15 years ago." Gregson frowned. "Harrow wasn't employed then." "Exactly." The inspector scratched his head. "I dislike old clues. They have a habit of surviving." Holmes next turned his attention to the frame itself. Removing the backing completely, he discovered something unexpected. A folded scrap of yellowed newspaper, hidden between canvas and wood, carefully preserved. The date immediately caught my eye. October 14th, 1894. Nearly 30 years earlier. Holmes unfolded it. A section had been neatly cut away. Only one headline remained visible. "Prominent barrister dies during country house fire." Nothing else. The remainder had been deliberately removed. Holmes stared thoughtfully at the fragment. "A fire." Miss Pembroke looked puzzled. "My uncle never mentioned one. I suspect he preferred not to." That afternoon Holmes insisted upon visiting the local newspaper office in the nearby village. The editor, Mr. Samuel Pierce, proved an elderly gentleman with an astonishing memory. "A fire?" he repeated. "Pembroke Hall?" "No." He shook his head. "Different county." Holmes showed him the clipping. The old editor adjusted his spectacles. "I remember this." "You do?" "Perfectly. It caused quite a sensation." "What happened?" The editor frowned. "The details escape me. There were rumors." "What sort?" "That the wrong man died." Holmes's eyes brightened ever so slightly. "The wrong man?" "They never proved it." "Who survived?" "I cannot recall." He rubbed his forehead. "It was years ago." Holmes thanked him politely, though I could see disappointment upon his face. Even so, I knew that a single forgotten phrase often proved sufficient for his extraordinary mind. As evening approached, we returned to Blackwood House. The household appeared even more anxious than before. Servants whispered constantly. Doors remained locked. Curtains were drawn before sunset. Bennett met us in the entrance hall. "There has been another incident." Holmes removed his gloves. "What now?" "The gardener, Mr. Briggs. He says someone entered the old greenhouse." "Were they seen?" "Only briefly." "What did they take?" "Nothing." Holmes looked toward the gardens. "Then why go there?" They left something. Within minutes we crossed the damp lawn. The greenhouse stood abandoned near the far wall of the estate. Broken panes rattled softly in the wind. Inside, neglected vines climbed rusting iron frames. Briggs pointed toward an old wooden bench. It was there. Upon the bench rested a small velvet box. Holmes opened it. Inside lay nothing, only a faded indentation in the lining. Something had once been kept there. A ring, a brooch, or perhaps a key. Holmes lifted the lid more closely. Upon the inside, written in tiny ink scarcely visible to the naked eye, appeared 4 words. The third promise remains unpaid. Holmes closed the box. He neither smiled nor frowned. Instead, he became unusually thoughtful. As we turned to leave the greenhouse, he suddenly stopped. His eyes had fallen upon the damp earth outside the doorway. There, plainly visible in the fading light, were 2 distinct sets of footprints. One belonged to heavy workmen's boots, the other to elegant women's shoes. Both entered the greenhouse. Only one set came out. I looked at Holmes. He looked at the tracks. Neither of us spoke. Very slowly he knelt and measured the prints with his pocket rule. Then he rose with an expression I had learned to respect. "What is it?" I whispered. He kept his eyes fixed upon the second trail. "The lady," he said quietly, "never left." At that very moment, from somewhere deep within the abandoned greenhouse, there came the unmistakable sound of a woman softly crying. Not ahead of us, not outside, but beneath our feet. There are cases in which the criminal conceals his hand with remarkable ingenuity, and there are others in which he seeks rather to bewilder than to hide. The affair of Blackwood House had now entered a stage where every fresh discovery appeared to deepen the mystery instead of diminishing it. Yet I had learned from long experience that Sherlock Holmes never regarded confusion as an obstacle. To him it was often the surest indication that the truth lay close at hand. The faint sound which had reached us beneath the floor of the abandoned greenhouse was unmistakably that of a woman weeping. Inspector Gregson drew back involuntarily. "You heard it?" "I did," said Holmes quietly. The gardener crossed himself. "There are old stories about this place, sir." Holmes turned. "What stories?" Briggs shifted uneasily. "They say the greenhouse was built over older cellars. My grandfather claimed there were tunnels beneath the estate." Gregson gave an impatient snort. "Country gossip." "Perhaps," Holmes replied. "But gossip has occasionally preserved facts after memory has abandoned them." Without another word he knelt beside the stone floor. The greenhouse was little more than a ruin. Cracked panes admitted the cold November wind, causing the dead vines to sway with a faint whisper. Dust covered everything except the narrow path leading to the wooden bench upon which we had found the empty velvet box. Holmes tapped several of the stone flags lightly with the handle of his cane. Most answered with a dull, solid sound. One did not. It returned a distinctly hollow note. Gregson crouched beside him. A loose slab?
No.
A cavity beneath. Holmes examined the joints between the stones. Years of dirt had settled into every crack except one narrow seam. "This has been lifted recently." "How recently?" "Within a week." Briggs looked astonished. "I've not been in here for months." "I do not believe you have." Holmes produced his penknife and carefully inserted the blade beneath the edge. The slab resisted at first. Then, with a heavy scrape, it shifted. Cold air rushed upward from below. Beneath lay a narrow flight of stone steps descending into darkness. Gregson whistled softly. "A hidden cellar." Holmes accepted the lantern from Bennett. Softly. "A hidden cellar." Holmes accepted the lantern from Bennett. "No." He held the light lower. A passage. The staircase disappeared into blackness beneath the estate. "I'll go first," I said. Holmes shook his head. "You will remain directly behind me." Gregson drew his revolver. "So shall I." Holmes smiled faintly. I expected nothing less. The steps descended perhaps 20 feet before opening into a low brick tunnel. Moisture dripped steadily from the ceiling. The air smelled of damp earth, old timber, and neglect. Our lantern cast long shadows against the walls. For several moments no one spoke. Then Holmes stopped. "What do you observe, Watson?" I looked carefully. The passage was thick with dust. "There are footprints." "Several people."
No.
I examined them more closely. "You are right. Though numerous impressions crossed the floor, they belong to only 2 distinct kinds of footwear. Heavy boots, and smaller ladies' shoes. The same prints from the greenhouse." Holmes nodded. "They entered?" I looked ahead. None returned. Gregson muttered quietly, "I dislike this." Holmes continued onward. The tunnel curved gradually beneath the grounds. At intervals ancient wooden doors appeared in the walls, all swollen shut by damp. One had collapsed entirely. Behind it lay only an empty storage chamber. Another concealed shelves filled with mouldering wine bottles. Finally we reached a heavy oak door reinforced with rusted iron bands. It stood slightly ajar. Holmes extinguished the lantern for a moment. "Listen." Silence. Very faintly, the same quiet sobbing. A woman's voice, somewhere beyond the door. Gregson tightened his grip upon his revolver. Holmes pushed gently. The hinges groaned. The chamber beyond proved surprisingly large. It had once served as a wine cellar. Broken barrels lay scattered across the floor. Dust covered nearly every surface. Near the far wall stood a single wooden chair. Upon it rested nothing. The room was empty. The crying ceased instantly. Gregson looked about in irritation. "There is no one here." Holmes did not answer. He walked slowly around the chamber. His attention settled upon the chair. He touched its back lightly. "Recently used. How can you tell?" The seat remained perfectly clean. Someone had occupied it. Very recently. As Holmes examined the chair, I noticed something unusual near the wall behind it. "There is a mark." Holmes joined me. A long scratch ran across the brickwork roughly 3 feet above the floor. It appeared fresh. He measured it with his pocket rule. "What made it?" "A metal object. A tool, perhaps." He next knelt beside the wall itself. His fingertips discovered another narrow groove almost invisible beneath accumulated grime. Without hesitation he pressed firmly. To my astonishment, a section of brickwork moved inward. A concealed door. Cold air poured through the opening. Beyond lay another chamber, smaller, completely empty. Yet upon its floor rested one object alone, a child's wooden horse. Miss Pembroke's family crest had been carved crudely into one side. Gregson frowned. "What has this to do with murder?" Holmes picked up the toy. "The workmanship." He turned it over. "There are initials." I bent closer. E.P. Eleanor Pembroke again. So it would seem. Holmes weighed the toy thoughtfully. This belonged to her. But why hide it underground? He slipped it carefully into his pocket. Is precisely the question. By the time we returned to the house, darkness had fully settled across the estate. Rain began to fall. Holmes retired immediately to the library. There he spread every clue collected thus far across the great reading table. The anonymous letters, the newspaper clipping, the velvet box, the toy horse, the photograph, the receipt for the antique chess set, the Black Knight, the scrap reading she knows now. For nearly an hour he neither spoke nor moved. I had seen him assume this posture before. His remarkable brain was arranging its pieces. Finally he murmured almost to himself, "No." "What is it?" "I have been asking the wrong question." "In what way?" "I have wondered why Sir Alister feared the past." "Naturally." Holmes looked up. "I should instead ask—" He paused. "Who feared Sir Alister remembering it?" Shortly before midnight Holmes requested that I accompany him to the old library once more. "We are returning?" "For the portrait?" "No." "The books?" "No." He smiled. "For the lyre." I confess I understood nothing. The library lay deserted. Only the ticking of the bracket clock disturbed the silence. Holmes walked directly toward the shelves. Without hesitation he removed a volume of Milton, then another, finally a thick history of medieval England. Behind them lay a narrow speaking tube built into the wall. A servant's tube, so one would think. He placed his ear against it. "It does not lead to the kitchens." "Where then?" I wondered. He produced a length of thin wire from his pocket and carefully lowered it into the tube. After several moments it struck something solid, not empty. Holmes withdrew the wire. Upon its tip clung a tiny fragment of black cloth. He held it beneath the lamp. The fabric contained an almost invisible silver thread, exactly matching the thread we had found among the ashes in Harrow's fireplace. Holmes smiled very slowly. "You recognize it?" "I recognize a uniform." "What uniform?" He folded the thread away. "One that no longer officially exists." Before I could question him further, hurried footsteps echoed outside. Miss Pembroke burst into the library, pale with terror. "Mr. Holmes!" "What has happened?" "It's Mr. March." "The solicitor?" "He's gone." "What do you mean?" "I was speaking with him only moments ago." "And now?" She struggled for breath. "His room—" "Yes?" "Is empty." Gregson arrived almost simultaneously. "We've searched the corridor." "No sign?" "None." Holmes's expression did not change. "Show me!" Mr. Edwin March's chamber overlooked the front gardens. The door stood open. His luggage remained untouched. His coat still hung upon its peg. His pocket watch rested upon the bedside table. Nothing suggested preparation for departure. Only one object seemed out of place. Upon the writing desk lay a folded sheet of cream paper. Gregson swore softly. Another letter. Holmes unfolded it. The handwriting was, once again, that of Sir Alister Pembroke. This message contained only a single sentence. "You have counted every suspect except the one who was present before the first death." Holmes read it twice, then folded it carefully. For perhaps half a minute he remained perfectly still. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet certainty unlike anything I had yet heard during the investigation.
"Watson."
"Yes, tomorrow." He looked slowly around the room. "I shall accuse the murderer." I stared at him. "You know who it is?" "I know who believes they have already won." He extinguished the lamp. Outside, thunder rolled across the dark sky, and somewhere within Blackwood House, hidden by the sound of the storm, a door closed very softly. Not by the wind, by someone who had just heard Holmes's declaration. It has often been remarked that Sherlock Holmes rarely declared himself certain until every loose thread had been gathered into his hand. Yet there existed another characteristic of his method which has received less attention. Once he had discerned the outline of the truth, he no longer pursued the criminal instead. He compelled the criminal to come to him. The morning after the disappearance of Mr. Edwin March dawned beneath a sky of iron-grey cloud. Rain had washed the gravel paths clean, while the gardens of Blackwood House glistened with a melancholy brilliance. Despite the beauty of the scene, the atmosphere within the house had become almost unbearable. One man had died. One prisoner had vanished from a locked room. One solicitor had disappeared without trace. Anonymous letters continued to arrive in the handwriting of the dead. Even the servants now crossed themselves whenever they passed the old greenhouse. Holmes, however, appeared curiously refreshed. He had risen before sunrise, and when I joined him in the library, I found him arranging the various pieces of evidence into neat rows across the great oak table. The Black Knight, the velvet box, the child's wooden horse, the newspaper clipping, the scraps of anonymous messages, the receipt for the antique chess set, and finally the impossible letters. "You slept?" I asked. "For precisely 48 minutes. You appear remarkably cheerful." Holmes smiled. "I have discovered something invaluable." "The murderer?"
"No. What then?"
"The murderer's mistake." Inspector Gregson entered at that moment, accompanied by Inspector Lestrade. The two officers looked equally exhausted. "There is still no sign of March," "There is still no sign of March," Gregson announced. "Nor Harrow," added Lestrade. Holmes nodded. "I expected as much." Lestrade folded his arms. "You claimed yesterday that today you would accuse the murderer." "I did." "Well?" Holmes calmly poured himself another cup of coffee. "Not yet." Gregson groaned. "I knew it." "My dear Gregson," Holmes replied, "one does not harvest fruit before it ripens." Lestrade looked impatient. "Have you at least identified your suspect?" "Entirely." "Then arrest him." "I cannot." "Why not?" "Because the evidence still belongs to me." Neither inspector understood. Nor, I confess, did I. Holmes continued, "This evening the evidence will belong to Scotland Yard." After breakfast Holmes requested the presence of every remaining member of the household. Miss Eleanor, Charles Bennet, Mrs. Bennet, Emily Foster, Briggs the gardener, young Carter, even the cook was summoned. They assembled in the drawing-room with evident apprehension. Holmes stood before the fireplace. "I have only one request." No one spoke. "This evening no servant is to leave the house." Bennet bowed. "As you wish. No fires are to be lit after sunset." Mrs. Bennet looked puzzled. "Very good, sir. No curtains are to be drawn." Again they agreed. "And lastly," Holmes paused, "every clock in Blackwood House is to remain unwound." Gregson frowned. "What possible purpose can that serve?" Holmes smiled. "I wish to know who cannot bear silence." The remainder of the afternoon Holmes spent walking alone through the estate. Twice I observed him measuring distances between windows. Once he climbed the old tower overlooking the gardens. Later he disappeared into the greenhouse for nearly an hour. When he returned, his boots were covered with damp clay. "You found something." I confirmed something.
"Wow."
He merely handed me a folded sheet. It was a rough sketch of the estate. Across it Holmes had drawn several lines connecting seemingly unrelated places. The study, the greenhouse, the library, the morning room. They formed a perfect triangle within a larger circle. What does it mean? Holmes tapped the center. The murderer never traveled randomly. You trace the movements? I trace the intention. I stared at the sketch. You mean every incident occurred within this pattern? Exactly. And why? Holmes folded the paper again. Because every destination concealed one thing.
What?
A memory. As evening approached, Holmes finally revealed part of his plan.
Watson.
Yes? I require your assistance. Naturally. You must appear to distrust me. I laughed. I beg your pardon? In public. For what purpose? Our opponent reads behavior more carefully than words. You wish me to quarrel with you. If possible. I fear I possess little talent for acting. Holmes looked amused. You underestimate yourself. I should rather not. It is essential. And afterwards, you will accompany Miss Pembroke to the conservatory. What about you? I shall be elsewhere.
Where?
I sincerely hope our adversary asks the same question. At precisely 7 o'clock, Holmes gathered everyone in the great dining hall. The long mahogany table had been cleared. Only candles illuminated the chamber. Outside the wind moaned softly through the trees. Holmes remained standing. Ladies and gentlemen, every eye turned toward him. During the last several days we have all pursued a phantom. Gregson shifted impatiently. The letters, the disappearances, the hidden compartments, the portrait, they appear unrelated. He looked slowly around the room. They are not. Silence settled over the gathering. Holmes continued. The person responsible stands far closer to us than anyone has imagined. Miss Pembroke clasped her hands tightly. Gregson leaned forward. Well? Holmes looked directly at me. Unfortunately, he paused deliberately. Dr. Watson refuses to accept my conclusion. Every head turned toward me. I remembered my instructions. I cannot accept accusations unsupported by proof. Holmes answered sharply. Your sentiment does you credit, but not justice. I prefer evidence. As do we. Then produce it. Gregson looked bewildered. Are you too serious? Holmes ignored him. I had hoped for your confidence, and I had hoped for certainty. The exchange felt remarkably uncomfortable, though entirely staged. Holmes turned away. So be it. Without another word he left the dining hall. The room buzzed immediately with whispered conversation. Gregson looked after him in astonishment. I've never seen Holmes lose his temper. Neither had I. Which convinced me the performance had succeeded. Following Holmes's instructions, I escorted Miss Pembroke toward the conservatory. She seemed troubled. You truly disagree with him? I smiled faintly. I have learned never to assume I understand Sherlock Holmes completely. The conservatory lay quiet beneath the moonlight. Broken clouds drifted across the sky. Beyond the glass walls stretched the dark gardens. Miss Pembroke stood silently among the winter plants. Suddenly she whispered, Doctor! Yes? I think someone is watching us. I turned immediately. Nothing. Only shadows beyond the glass. Movement. A figure slipped silently behind the hedges. Tall. Exactly as before. I sprang toward the door. The figure retreated. I pursued without hesitation. Branches whipped across my face as I ran through the darkness. The stranger remained always just beyond reach. At last the chase led toward the abandoned greenhouse. The door stood open. Nothing. The intruder had vanished. Breathing heavily, I searched every corner. No one, only silence. Then I noticed something lying upon the stone floor. A silver raven signet ring. The very ring I had glimpsed upon the intruder's hand 2 nights before. I picked it up. Its inner surface bore an inscription. 3 promises. 1 survivor. A cold voice spoke behind me. I was wondering when you would find that. I turned instantly. Holmes stepped from the darkness. You! He smiled. Our quarry has taken the bait. You arranged this. Entirely. The chase, the ring, the argument. He nodded. Every part. I handed him the ring. You expected the murderer to abandon it? No. I expected them to believe they had. Before I could ask another question, Bennett came running across the lawn. His face had become as white as the mist itself. Mr. Holmes! What is it? The library! What of it? The portrait? He struggled for breath. Holmes did not appear surprised. Bennett stared. Holmes placed the raven ring carefully into his pocket. Our guest has finally shown us what they were truly searching for. We hurried back to the house. The library door stood wide open. The hooks above the fireplace were empty. The portrait had vanished without trace. Yet it was not the missing painting that first caught Holmes's attention. Pinned neatly to the bare wall where the portrait had hung was a single playing card, the Queen of Spades. Across its face, written in Sir Alistair Pembroke's unmistakable handwriting, appeared 5 chilling words: "Meet me where promises began." It has long been my conviction that the greatest triumphs of Sherlock Holmes were achieved not by brilliance alone, but by an extraordinary patience. While other men hurried toward conclusions, Holmes possessed the rare gift of allowing truth to reveal itself at precisely the proper moment. Thus it was that, despite the theft of the portrait and the fresh challenge left upon the library wall, he exhibited neither surprise nor alarm. Indeed, as we stood before the empty hooks from which the portrait had been removed, I fancied I detected the faintest trace of satisfaction upon his keen features. Inspector Gregson, however, displayed no such composure. "They've escaped again," he cried. "Another theft under our very noses." Holmes calmly removed the Queen of Spades from the wall.
No.
"No? Our adversary has arrived exactly where I intended." Gregson stared at him. "You expected the portrait to be stolen?" "I made certain it would be." I looked sharply at my companion. "You anticipated this?" Holmes slipped the playing card into his notebook. "My dear Watson, I never believed the portrait itself was valuable." "Then why guard it?" "I wished our opponent to believe I considered it indispensable." Gregson threw up his hands. "You used it as bait?" "Precisely." "And now it's gone." Holmes smiled. "Exactly." The inspector muttered something beneath his breath which I considered unfit for publication. The mysterious message upon the playing card echoed persistently in my thoughts. "Meet me where promises began." When at last we returned to our room, I ventured the obvious question. "Where did the promises begin?" Holmes removed his coat with deliberate care. "An excellent question. You already know. I possess a theory. It requires confirmation." He spread the rough map of the estate upon the table once more. His pencil traced a line from the house to the crypt, then to the greenhouse, then, curiously enough, to the old chapel standing beyond the eastern gardens. I had forgotten the chapel. So had everyone else. It has never been mentioned. "Exactly." Holmes looked up. "That omission interested me." The chapel stood nearly a quarter of a mile from Blackwood House, hidden among ancient oak trees, whose branches intertwined so thickly that moonlight scarcely reached the ground. It had long since fallen into disuse. Its weather-beaten stone walls leaned noticeably with age. The bell tower was empty. Only a rusted iron cross remained above the roof. Holmes examined the entrance. No fresh footprints. "You expected some?" I hoped. The heavy oak door opened reluctantly. Inside, the air smelled faintly of damp wood and old incense. Broken pews lined the nave. Fragments of colored glass lay scattered beneath the shattered windows. At the far end stood a simple stone altar. Holmes approached it without hesitation. "Someone has been here." "What makes you say so?" Again the dust. To another man it would have appeared undisturbed. To Holmes it read like a printed page. He knelt beside the altar. A narrow groove ran across the flagstones. "This has moved." "Recently?" "Within hours." Together we pushed against the heavy altar. To my astonishment it slid slowly aside. Beneath it yawned another concealed staircase. Gregson uttered an impatient groan. "Does this estate contain anything besides secret passages?" Holmes chuckled quietly. "It appears not." The stair descended into a circular chamber unlike any we had yet encountered. Its walls were lined with shelves containing ancient account books, family records, and leather-bound journals. At the center stood a large oak table. Upon it rested a single brass candlestick, still warm. "He has only just left," I whispered. Holmes touched the candle. Within 15 minutes, Gregson drew his revolver. "Spread out."
No.
Holmes raised his hand. "Our visitor wishes us to search." "What makes you think so?" "Nothing has been concealed." Indeed, the room appeared almost unnaturally orderly. Every book stood neatly arranged. Every drawer remained closed. No hurried departure. No signs of struggle. Only one object seemed out of place. The stolen portrait. It leaned casually against the far wall. Gregson hurried toward it. "We found it." Holmes did not move. Instead, he studied the floor. "There are only 2 sets of footprints." "So?" "One entered." "And?" "One left." Gregson frowned. "You mean—" "The portrait was brought here, but not removed." Holmes nodded. "It was never the destination. The portrait itself had changed. Someone had cut away the canvas containing the woman's face. Only the background remained." Miss Pembroke gasped softly. "They've destroyed it." Holmes shook his head. "No. They removed only one portion. The face. Exactly. He carefully examined the severed edges. A remarkably steady hand. Gregson looked baffled. Why steal the face? Holmes answered almost to himself. Because identity is more dangerous than evidence. Upon the oak table lay another folded letter. Holmes opened it. Unlike the previous messages, this one was considerably longer. It read, "Mr. Holmes, you have followed every trail exactly as intended. You have found every hiding place except the first. The dead did not keep the promise. The living were forced to finish it. Tonight, before midnight, the last witness will disappear. If you still believe justice and truth are the same thing, come alone." No signature appeared. Only the familiar handwriting. Gregson folded his arms. "It's a trap." Holmes smiled. "Certainly. We should ignore it. I have no intention of doing so." On our return to Blackwood House, Holmes appeared more thoughtful than at any previous stage of the investigation. After supper he asked Bennet an unexpected question. "How old were you when you entered Sir Alister's service?" 18, sir." "You remember his wedding?" The butler's face changed almost imperceptibly. "I do." "It was held in the chapel?" Holmes nodded slowly. "And the promises?" Bennet lowered his eyes. "They began there." The words hung heavily in the air. Holmes asked no further questions. Near 10 o'clock he finally revealed his intentions. "Watson." "Yes?" "I require one favor." "Anything. No matter what occurs tonight." He paused. "You must not follow me." I laughed quietly. "My dear Holmes, you cannot expect." "I do." "You are walking into danger." "I hope so." "I refuse." Holmes looked directly at me. "Your loyalty has saved my life more than once, and will continue to. This time it may cost the case." His voice was unusually earnest. "If you trust me—" He stopped. "Remain here." Reluctantly, "If you trust me—" He stopped. "Remain here." Reluctantly, I agreed, though I confess my conscience rebelled against the promise almost as soon as I had given it. At precisely 11:30 Holmes departed alone. The house fell silent. Every clock remained unwound as he had ordered. No servant stirred. No wind disturbed the trees. Midnight approached with painful slowness. At last I could bear the waiting no longer. Promise or no promise, I took my revolver and quietly left my room. The grounds lay silver beneath the moon. Holmes's footprints led clearly toward the old chapel. I followed them at a distance. The chapel door stood open. A faint light flickered below. Descending cautiously, I reached the hidden chamber. It was empty. The candle still burned. Holmes was nowhere to be seen. Only one object rested upon the table. His violin. I recognized it instantly. He never traveled without it. My heart sank. Then I noticed a folded note lying beneath the instrument. It contained only 4 hurried words. "Too late. Don't follow." Before I could comprehend their meaning, the sound of a pistol shot echoed through the underground passage. One shot, followed immediately by another. Then silence. I snatched up my revolver and ran toward the sound. The narrow tunnel curved sharply. Beyond the bend I saw a lantern lying upon the ground. Its flame still burned. A man lay motionless, face downward, blood spreading slowly across his coat. For one terrible instant I believed it to be Holmes. I turned the body over. It was not my friend. It was Mr. Edwin March, the missing solicitor. His eyes stared sightlessly upward. Clutched tightly in his right hand was a torn fragment of canvas cut from the stolen portrait. Upon the reverse side, hastily written in fresh ink, were 3 chilling words. Holmes was right. And somewhere beyond the darkness of the tunnel I heard the unmistakable sound of slow, deliberate footsteps walking away. The sudden and violent death of Mr. Edwin March marked the turning point of the Blackwood House affair. Until that dreadful moment we had pursued shadows, deciphered cryptic messages, and wandered through a labyrinth of hidden passages and ancient promises. But with the solicitor's murder, the invisible hand that had so carefully manipulated every event finally revealed itself not by intention, but by necessity. I bent over the unfortunate man without delay. Though the wound in his breast was unmistakably fatal, professional habit compelled me to examine him. "There is no hope," I said quietly. Holmes, who had emerged from the darkness behind me with extraordinary composure, knelt opposite. "You followed me." "I did." "You ignored my instructions." "I should do so again." For the briefest instant a smile touched his lips. "I expected nothing less." He turned his attention immediately to March's body. "What do you observe?" "The shot entered from close range. No powder burns." I looked up. "You agree?" "I agree with your observation." He gently loosened the dead man's fingers from the torn piece of canvas. The fragment displayed part of a painted shoulder and the edge of dark green silk. Upon its reverse appeared the words, "Holmes was right," written hastily, freshly. I frowned. He wrote this before dying. Holmes examined the handwriting.
No.
No? It was written after he had already collapsed. Impossible. The angle of the ink. I fail to understand. The letters descend unnaturally. He held the fragment toward the lantern. A dying man writes irregularly, naturally. This hand remained remarkably steady. He folded the canvas carefully. Someone wished us to believe March accused another before death. Then he never wrote it. I am convinced he did not. Inspector Gregson and Lestrade arrived moments later, accompanied by 2 constables. The narrow chamber beneath the chapel quickly became crowded. Gregson looked from the body to Holmes. "This is murder." Holmes nodded. "Undoubtedly. And March has returned only to die." "Precisely." Lestrade noticed the canvas fragment. "What's that?" "A final message." "From March?" Holmes answered quietly, "From the murderer." Gregson frowned. "You've changed your mind?" "I have changed nothing. You said yesterday you knew the criminal." "I do." "Then arrest him." Holmes looked directly at the inspector. "Tomorrow." Gregson threw his hands into the air. "Always tomorrow." Holmes merely smiled. "I require one final confession. We returned to Blackwood House shortly before dawn. The household had not slept. Miss Eleanor stood anxiously in the entrance hall. The moment she saw Holmes, she rushed forward. "Mr. March?" Holmes removed his hat. "I regret to inform you—" She understood immediately. Her face grew pale. "Oh, no!" "He was murdered." She lowered herself slowly into a chair. For several moments no one spoke. Then Holmes addressed Bennet. "I require every member of the household to remain within the house until tomorrow evening." The old butler bowed. "It shall be done. No exceptions." "None?" After breakfast Holmes shut himself inside Sir Alister's study. For nearly 4 hours he admitted no one. Even I was excluded. At length he emerged carrying 3 objects, the Black Knight, the silver raven ring, and the child's wooden horse. He placed them upon the table before me. "What connection do they share?" I examined them carefully. "I cannot say." "Look again." The knight, the horse, the raven. Suddenly I noticed something. They all face left. Holmes smiled. "Exactly. So? They are not decorative. They indicate direction?" He arranged them upon the estate map. Each pointed toward the same place. Not the crypt, not the greenhouse, not the chapel. "The old library, the speaking tube," I whispered. Holmes nodded. "The last hiding place." Together we hurried upstairs. The library appeared exactly as before, save for the absence of the stolen portrait. Holmes walked directly toward the speaking tube concealed behind the shelves. This time he inserted a longer steel rod. After several careful movements, something clicked deep within the wall. A hidden panel swung open. Behind it lay a narrow cavity scarcely 6 inches wide. Inside rested a small leather notebook. Nothing else. Holmes lifted it gently. "The diary." "Sir Alister's?" "I believe so." The cover bore no title, only initials. Holmes opened it. The pages had been filled in Sir Alister's unmistakable handwriting. He turned rapidly toward the final entries, then stopped. His face became very still. "What is it?" Without answering, he handed me the book. The final page read, "If these words are ever found, then I have failed. I did not kill him, but I allowed everyone to believe I had. One lie protected 3 innocent lives. The truth will destroy them all." No name appeared, only the date, 28 years earlier. I looked toward Holmes. He confessed.
No.
He admitted deception, not murder. Holmes took back the diary. The entire case changes. That afternoon Holmes requested a private interview with Miss Eleanor Pembroke. I remained outside. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. When she emerged, tears stood in her eyes. Yet there was something else upon her face. Relief. Holmes accompanied her to the door. "You have been courageous. I should have told you sooner. You believed you were protecting him." "Yes." "I understand." She nodded silently. As she departed, I entered. "What did she tell you?" Holmes closed the study door. "Everything." My heart quickened. Then the mystery is solved. Almost. "You know who forged the letters?" "You know who murdered March?" "You know what happened 28 years ago?" Holmes looked directly into my eyes. "I know why Sir Alister welcomed death. Near sunset Holmes sent Bennet to summon everyone." "The entire household?" "Yes." "And the inspectors?" "Immediately." Within an hour the drawing-room had filled once more. Miss Pembroke, the servants, even the village reverend. An empty chair remained where Edwin March would have sat. Holmes stood before the fireplace. His violin rested quietly upon the mantelpiece. The recovered diary lay upon the table. Every eye fixed upon him. Gregson spoke first. "Well?" Holmes folded his hands. "Ladies and gentlemen." Silence answered him. "The time has come." He glanced slowly around the room. "The impossible letters," he touched them lightly, "were never written after Sir Alister's death." Gregson nodded impatiently. "We know that."
No.
Holmes looked calmly toward him. "You know only half. The handwriting? The ink? The paper? None explain the truth." He lifted the diary. "Sir Alister prepared every one of those letters years before his death." A murmur swept across the room. Miss Pembroke looked astonished. "He expected this?"
No.
Holmes's voice remained perfectly steady. "He expected to be murdered." Complete silence followed. Gregson frowned deeply. "But the doctor certified heart failure." Holmes smiled faintly. "He died naturally." "He did." "Then who murdered him?" Holmes looked toward the closed door. "No one." The inspector blinked. "I don't understand." "You soon shall." Holmes paused. "The murderer," his eyes slowly settled upon one person in the room, "is standing among us." At that precise instant the library door burst violently open. A pistol report thundered through the house. The bullet shattered the great mirror above the fireplace. Before anyone could react, the lamps were extinguished. The room plunged into absolute darkness. Somewhere within the confusion a woman screamed. A chair overturned. Footsteps raced across the floor. Then came Holmes's calm voice from the darkness. "Do not move." A single match flared. Its tiny flame illuminated Holmes alone. He stood perfectly composed. One hand held his revolver. The other gripped the wrist of a cloaked figure struggling desperately to escape. As the hood slipped back into the light, I saw the face clearly for the very first time, and recognized it instantly. The realization struck me with such force that I involuntarily uttered a cry, for the person Holmes had captured was the one individual in Blackwood House whom no one, not even I, had ever seriously suspected. There are few scenes in my recollection which equal the extraordinary climax of the Blackwood House affair. Even now, after the passing of many years, I can recall every detail of that unforgettable evening, the broken mirror glittering upon the carpet, the smell of burnt powder hanging in the air, the frightened faces illuminated by Holmes's solitary match, and the cloaked prisoner whose carefully woven web of deception had finally begun to unravel. For several long seconds no one moved. Holmes retained an iron grip upon the captive's wrist. His revolver remained perfectly steady. "Light the lamps, Watson." I hastened to obey. As the room gradually filled with warm yellow light, every eye turned toward the prisoner. The hood had fallen completely away. A collective gasp spread through the assembled company. Inspector Gregson was the first to speak. "You!" Even the usually impassive Lestrade stared in open astonishment. The prisoner was Charles Bennet, the faithful butler, the man who had served the Pembroke family for more than 30 years, the man whose quiet dignity, unwavering loyalty, and impeccable manners had earned the confidence of every soul within Blackwood House. Miss Eleanor took an involuntary step backward. Mr. Bennet, the old servant, lowered his eyes. "I am sorry, Miss Eleanor." His voice was calm, far calmer than any innocent man unexpectedly accused. Gregson immediately produced a pair of handcuffs. "So it was you all along." Holmes quietly raised one hand. "Not yet," the inspector frowned. "You've caught him with a pistol." "Indeed? Then what more do you require?" Holmes guided Bennet gently toward a chair. He did not force him, nor did Bennet resist. The old butler removed his white gloves with remarkable composure and folded them neatly upon his lap. "I suppose," he said quietly, "you discovered the diary." "I did." "And the chapel." "And the speaking tube." Holmes inclined his head. "The final clue." A faint smile crossed Bennet's face. "I underestimated you." "You underestimated reason." For several moments neither man spoke. It seemed less an interrogation than a conversation between two minds who had finally reached the same destination by different roads. At length Holmes addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, before Inspector Gregson performs his duty, I believe every person present deserves to know precisely what has occurred. No one interrupted. Holmes walked slowly before the fireplace. This case has never concerned supernatural letters. He held up one of the mysterious envelopes, nor impossible handwriting. He placed it beside the recovered diary, nor even hidden passages. He looked toward Miss Eleanor. It began nearly 30 years ago. Holmes opened Sir Alister's diary. In the autumn of 1894, Sir Alister Pembroke entered into a private business partnership with 3 close friends. He looked toward Bennet. One of them was your father. The old butler nodded silently. The partnership collapsed after accusations of fraud. Holmes continued. A fire destroyed the country estate where the partners had gathered. He lifted the newspaper clipping. The newspapers reported that one man had died. The barrister, murmured the Reverend. Precisely. Holmes nodded. But the newspapers were mistaken. Gregson frowned. Then who died? No one knew. Holmes turned another page. The confusion allowed Sir Alister to conceal a terrible truth. He paused. The dead man had not perished accidentally. A murmur swept through the room. One of the partners caused the fire. Deliberately?
No.
Holmes answered quietly. Out of panic, he continued. Sir Alister discovered the truth, but instead of exposing the guilty man, Holmes tapped the diary. He accepted responsibility. Lestrade looked astonished. Why? Because exposing the truth would have ruined 3 innocent families. Gregson shook his head. So everyone believes Sir Alister guilty. Exactly. Miss Eleanor whispered, My uncle carried another man's sin. Holmes nodded gently. For nearly 3 decades, the room remained perfectly silent. Then Holmes turned toward Bennet. The room remained perfectly silent. Then Holmes turned toward Bennet. You alone learned the complete story?
When?
The night before Sir Alister died. Bennet spoke for the first time since his arrest. He summoned me. His voice trembled only slightly. He handed me the diary, and he told me that if anything happened to him... The old man closed his eyes. The truth must never be revealed. Miss Eleanor stared. He trusted you. He did. Holmes nodded. Sir Alister had already prepared several letters. The impossible letters. Exactly. They were intended as instructions, not threats. Holmes looked toward me. The old ink, the fresh paper, it all fits. The letters had indeed been written years before and carefully preserved. Only after Sir Alister's death had Bennet placed them into fresh envelopes and posted them according to his employer's instructions. The mystery of the letters written after death was finally solved. Gregson folded his arms. Very moving. But none of this explains murder. Holmes became grave once more. No, it explains only the letters. He faced Bennet. You obeyed Sir Alister faithfully. I tried. You also discovered something else. The old butler remained silent. The portrait. Bennet slowly nodded. The face. It identified the 4th partner. A ripple of surprise passed through the room. Holmes continued. The portrait originally showed not merely Sir Alister's wife, he paused, but another gentleman standing beside her. The 4th partner. Exactly. Someone painted him out years later. Holmes nodded. The missing face upon the stolen canvas belonged to the true author of the tragedy. Gregson leaned forward. Who was he? Holmes looked directly at Bennet. You know? The butler lowered his head. I do. And so did Edwin March. Another silence. Holmes continued. March discovered the truth after examining the old legal papers. He intended to reveal it. The portrait proved everything, so he was killed. Bennet closed his eyes. Not by me. The room stirred uneasily. Gregson stepped forward. You expect us to believe that? Holmes quietly raised one hand. I do. The inspector stared. What? Bennet is not guilty of Edwin March's murder. Everyone looked at Holmes in astonishment. You've arrested the wrong person. Holmes smiled faintly. For the second time. Gregson seemed utterly bewildered. You just caught him with a pistol. Certainly. The shot was intended for me. And? It was fired by Bennet. The old servant nodded sadly. I wished only to stop you. Holmes continued calmly. He believed exposing the truth would destroy Miss Pembroke. Miss Eleanor looked toward Bennet. You were protecting me. I gave Sir Alister my word. Tears filled the old man's eyes. I had already failed him once. Gregson looked utterly confused. If Bennet didn't kill March, he looked around the room. Then who did? Holmes walked slowly toward the fireplace. His expression had become colder than I had seen at any previous moment. He reached into his pocket. From it he withdrew the silver raven signet ring. He placed it carefully upon the table. The owner of this ring." He next laid down the antique black knight, the purchaser of the chess set. Finally he produced the tiny scrap reading. "She knows now." The same handwriting appears upon all three. He looked slowly around the room. "Our true murderer," his eyes rested upon one individual, "has remained in this house from the very beginning." Every person instinctively followed Holmes's gaze. It came to rest upon Mrs. Bennet, the housekeeper. She stood perfectly motionless. Her face betrayed neither surprise nor fear, only exhaustion. Very slowly she removed her apron. Then, with remarkable calmness, she reached into her pocket. Gregson shouted, "Don't move!" But it was too late. Instead of producing a weapon, she laid a faded photograph upon the table. It showed 4 young people standing together outside a country house nearly 30 years earlier. One of them was Sir Alister Pembroke. One was Charles Bennet's father. The third was the barrister reported dead in the newspaper. The fourth was Mrs. Bennet. Not as a servant, but as a young governess. Holmes looked at the photograph, then quietly spoke the words which finally explained every hidden clue. The fourth partner, he looked directly into her eyes, was never a man. The room seemed to stop breathing. Mrs. Bennet closed her eyes. When she opened them again, the quiet, obedient housekeeper had vanished. In her place stood a woman who had carried one terrible secret for nearly 30 years. She drew a slow breath. Then, in a voice scarcely above a whisper, she uttered the words that would unravel the entire mystery. "Very well, Mr. Holmes." She looked at every face in the room before finally fixing her gaze upon the diary resting beside the impossible letters. "I shall tell you how Sir Alister died." And with that confession about to begin, every clue, every hidden passage, every anonymous letter, every vanished witness, and every impossible coincidence finally stood upon the threshold of complete explanation. If there is one lesson which I learned from my long association with Sherlock Holmes, it is that justice and law, though often companions, do not always travel the same road. There were occasions when the law demanded punishment while justice pleaded for mercy, and there were others when the reverse proved true. The conclusion of the Blackwood House affair belonged unmistakably to the former class. No one in that silent drawing-room stirred. Mrs. Bennet remained standing beside the fireplace, the faded photograph resting upon the polished oak table before her. The years seemed suddenly to fall away from her face. She no longer resembled the quiet housekeeper who had spent decades tending Blackwood House. Instead, she appeared as the young woman preserved in the photograph, a woman whose life had been altered forever by a single night nearly 30 years before. Inspector Gregson stepped cautiously forward. "I advise you to say nothing until your solicitor is present." She smiled faintly. "A solicitor?" Her eyes drifted toward the empty chair once occupied by Edwin March. "The last solicitor who knew the truth lies dead beneath the chapel." No one answered. Holmes folded his hands behind his back. "You may begin whenever you are ready." She nodded slowly. "I suppose I owe that much to Sir Alister." "My name," she began quietly, "was never Margaret Bennet." A murmur swept through the room. "My maiden name was Margaret Ashcombe." Holmes gave the slightest inclination of his head. "I believed as much," she continued. "My father managed the Ashcombe estate where Sir Alister and his companions frequently gathered during their younger years." Her eyes rested upon the faded photograph. "We were all friends once." She touched each figure in turn. "Richard Langley, Thomas Bennet, and myself." Gregson frowned. "There were 4 partners. There always were. Not 3. No." She drew a deep breath. "They intended to invest in a railway company." Holmes remained silent. "The venture failed. Money vanished. Accusations followed." She lowered her eyes. "Richard Langley believed Sir Alister had betrayed him." Richard Langley believed Sir Alister had betrayed him. The drawing-room had become so quiet that the crackling fire sounded unnaturally loud. Mrs. Bennet continued. "The 4 of us met one final evening at Ashcombe Manor, the very house mentioned in the newspaper." She nodded. "The argument became violent. Richard accused everyone. He drew a revolver." Miss Eleanor gasped softly. "My uncle never told me. He hoped never to." Mrs. Bennet clasped her trembling hands. During the struggle, her voice faltered. "I pushed Richard." No one spoke. He stumbled against an oil lamp. The lamp overturned. The curtains caught fire. Within moments, the entire room was engulfed in flames. Gregson asked quietly, "And Richard?" "He never escaped." A long silence followed. Finally Holmes spoke. "You did not intend his death." She shook her head violently. "Never. But you believed yourself responsible. Every day since, Holmes nodded. Sir Alister knew that. He found me after the fire. And he carried me outside. Her eyes filled with tears. He returned into the burning house searching for Richard. But it was already too late, she whispered. He found only his body. Gregson looked puzzled. But why conceal it? Mrs. Bennet answered before Holmes could speak. Because I was 20 years old. My father was dying. My family possessed nothing. If the truth became public, you would have been charged. She nodded. Sir Alister refused to allow it. He persuaded the others to remain silent. Holmes added quietly, he accepted public suspicion. She looked toward him gratefully. He sacrificed his own honor for mine. Holmes walked slowly toward the window overlooking the dark gardens. The anonymous letters, Mrs. Bennet smiled sadly. They were his idea. He feared that one day the past would return. He wrote them, one each year, sometimes two. He instructed Charles Bennet to post them if circumstances demanded. The old butler lowered his head. I obeyed. You obeyed faithfully. Holmes looked toward him, until someone else discovered the diary. Every eye turned instinctively toward the table. The diary, Holmes continued, contained one fatal detail. The photograph, the portrait, the fourth partner. He turned slowly toward Mrs. Bennet. You believed Edwin March had learned your identity. She nodded. He found the legal papers. He questioned me. He recognized my maiden name. So you arranged a meeting beneath the chapel. Tears streamed silently down her face. I begged him to leave. He refused. He intended to publish everything. Gregson spoke sharply. So you shot him. She looked directly at him. No. Complete silence answered. No? It wasn't me. Holmes spoke calmly. She is telling the truth. Gregson threw up his hands. Again? Holmes continued. Mrs. Bennet did arrange the meeting. March arrived. So did another. Who? Holmes turned slowly toward Charles Bennet. The old butler closed his eyes. I did. Miss Eleanor stared in disbelief. Mr. Bennet, he spoke without lifting his head. I followed her. I feared exactly what would happen. You confronted March. I begged him to destroy the documents. He refused. He said the truth belonged to history. The old man swallowed heavily. I told him the truth belonged to the dead. And then he reached into his coat. I believe, his voice broke for the first time. I believed he was drawing a pistol. It was only a bundle of papers. Charles Bennet covered his face. My revolver discharged. I never intended. His words dissolved into silence. Gregson stepped forward. So you killed Edwin March? The old butler nodded slowly. I killed him. Mrs. Bennet cried out softly. No. He looked at her with extraordinary tenderness. You had already lived with one burden for 30 years. I would not permit another. She shook her head desperately. It should have been me. No. Holmes remained silent until both had regained some composure. Then he spoke quietly. The canvas fragment, the false dying message, the second pistol, the attempt upon my life, they were all intended to prevent me exposing Margaret Ashcombe. Charles Bennet nodded. I knew if you solved one mystery, you would solve them all. Gregson removed the handcuffs from his pocket. This time Holmes offered no objection. Charles Bennet stood without resistance. Before the inspector could fasten the cuffs, Miss Eleanor suddenly stepped forward. No! Everyone looked at her. She faced Holmes. My uncle spent 30 years protecting them. Holmes remained silent. He believed mercy was the greater justice. She turned toward Gregson. I shall give evidence, but I shall also tell the court everything. Gregson nodded solemnly. It will be placed before the judge. Charles Bennet smiled sadly. Thank you, Miss Eleanor. The following morning dawned clear for the first time since our arrival at Blackwood House. The fog had vanished. Sunlight bathed the old estate in a gentle golden glow. Holmes and I stood beside our waiting hansom cab. The police carriage had departed only minutes earlier, carrying Charles Bennet to London. Mrs. Bennet remained in Miss Eleanor's care until formal proceedings could begin. As Bennet climbed into the carriage, he removed one final envelope from his coat. I almost forgot. He handed it to Holmes. He asked me to give you this. Who? Sir Alister. Holmes accepted it without surprise. The envelope bore a date nearly 10 years old. Inside lay a single folded sheet. Holmes read it silently before passing it to me. It contained only a few lines. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, if this letter reaches you, then my greatest fear has come to pass. Remember this: a secret may protect the innocent for a time, but it imprisons the guilty forever. Do not judge my friends too harshly. They have already served a longer sentence than any court could impose. Alistair Pembroke." Holmes folded the letter with unusual care and returned it to its envelope. For several minutes we rode through the quiet London road without speaking. At last I broke the silence. "The title of the case is perfectly fitting." Holmes glanced toward me. "The letter written after death." He smiled faintly. No? The letters were written before death. Then why remember it by that name?" Holmes looked out at the passing countryside, where the first rays of sunlight pierced the morning mist. "Because the dead did not write to deceive us." He paused. "They wrote so that, when the proper hour arrived, the living might finally tell the truth." He leaned back against the carriage seat, closed his eyes, and for the first time since the case had begun, appeared entirely at peace. Thus ended what I have always regarded as one of the most singular investigations of Sherlock Holmes's remarkable career, a case in which no ghost ever held a pen, yet the voice of the dead guided us more faithfully than any living witness. And whenever I recall the impossible letters that arrived after Sir Alistair Pembroke's passing, I am reminded that the greatest mysteries are seldom hidden in darkness. More often they are concealed within acts of love, loyalty, and sacrifice that ordinary men fail to understand until it is far too late.